freedom, the core of Europe. Labas. Welcome to Lithuania.
I visit the temple because it's closed, but I can go in and also do a story about it. It'll be interesting. This house here, I mean, it's very modern. I have very fast internet and everything, but it was by my grandfather. So it was one of the first houses here. And it was an old stable near the house, and I've converted it into a house, actually.
Okay. All right.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you see and hear us?
We can hear you, but we can't see you. Yes, now we can see you. Yes.
Okay, so it's just a test because, we are setting up everything for the Vice Minister.
All right, great. So the Vice Minister will join us just for his panel, or?
He will join for second panel, yes.
Okay.
Lietuva tėvynė mūsų, tu didvyrių žemė. Ištraikė savo sūnus, estigrybės žemė. Tegu tavo vaikai eina, vien tai zorylės. Tegu dirba tavo naudai. Tegul saulė Lietuvos tamsumas prašalina. Ir tiesa mūsų žingsnius telydi. Tegu meilė Lietuvos dega mūsų širdyse. Vardan tos Lietuvos vienybė težydi.
Greece have evolved over the 30 years, and to recognize the Greek personalities and institutions for their contribution to the development of this relationship in the area of diplomacy, economy, culture, sports, and people-to-people contacts. Now, our original plan was to do this with champagne during a proper diplomatic reception, but the coronavirus forced us to look for other ways to celebrate. Using this opportunity first, I would like to wish strength to all those directly affected by this terrible illness. We here in Greece were fortunate that the first wave of the COVID-19 was quickly contained thanks to the efforts of the government and mobilization and support of the entire population. As a result, Greece has rightly deserved the prize and appreciation from all over the world for the brilliant job. Lithuania has also done a good job. However, what's important in the context of this celebration is that the COVID has tested whether what we once had still exists. Specifically, I mean unity and sacrifice of the people and their belief in the state that they have created during those 30 years. And while Lithuanians didn't take to balconies and windows to uplift self-isolation amid quarantine as Greeks, Spaniards, or Italians did, kindness and the need to unite was manifested with all strength again. A number of communal coronavirus response initiatives, projects, and funds sprang to complement the measures that were taken by the government to combat the pandemic. More recently, unity and belief in freedom of the Lithuanian people was once again shown as they gathered in support of democracy in Belarus. In a way of replicating the famous Baltic Way, some 50,000 Lithuanian people recently joined hands in a 32 kilometers long chain from the center of the capital Vilnius to the Belarus border in order to express solidarity with the democratic civil society of the neighboring country. You see, 50 years of the Soviet occupation and a struggle to break free have left Lithuanians with a sense of duty to assist other nations which long for freedom and democracy. We know oppression. We lived under it. And while the change there can be brought by no one else but the people of Belarus themselves, we, the free world, have a moral duty to support them by sending a clear message that we stand with them at this watershed moment in the country's history by putting all politics aside. Because at stake is the EU promise to stand and to act for democracy, human rights, and European values whenever and wherever they are threatened, and certainly so here in our very own Europe. Now, these difficult times check not only the strengths of individual states, but also the ability and benefits of the Western structures such as the European Union and NATO, on which European prosperity and security has long depended. Now, Lithuania has been a member of these structures for over 15 years now. It appreciates them very much and is ready to defend them. Whether it be a response to pandemic or a diplomatic or foreign challenge, Lithuania always assesses its positions on issues of common interest through the prism of European solidarity. We are much stronger and capable when we stand together, not alone. Greece has been and is one of the most vocal advocates for European unity and solidarity, from issues like migration to tensions in the region. As a frontline state, Greece reminds us that the defense of its borders and sovereignty is the defense of the borders and sovereignty of the entire European Union. Lithuania, being like Greece in a similar geostrategic position, understands this particularly well. This brings me to the last point. Difficult times also test the strengths of bilateral relations, people's friendships and partnerships. As we say, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Even through the lockdown Europe in April, Lithuania managed to send assistance to Greece to help with migratory flows and protection of the EU external border and the EU civil protection mechanism. I'm honored to be part of bringing two countries closer together as Lithuania's ambassador to Greece. As you will hear a little later from the video message of the Lithuanian Foreign Minister Linas Linkevičius, Lithuania is interested in deepening cooperation with Greece in various fields. His Excellency, alternate Foreign Minister for European Affairs of Greece, Miltiadis Varvitsiotis, will join with his message from the Greek side. In the meantime, let's continue with our program. We cannot imagine our lives without our friends, can we? Hence, such a lovely relations demands celebration, and what is celebration without gifts? Thanking for the friendship and partnership, we at the
We say labas to you.
Labas.
We say labas to today. We say labas to tomorrow.
Labas.
Embracing creativity in all its forms, when it inspires us, when it moves us, and millions of hearts across the globe. We say labas to ambition and progress. We say labas to Europe, its culture and its values. And most importantly, we say labas to freedom, the core of Europe. Labas. Welcome to Lithuania.
Lietuva tėvynė mūsų, tu didvyrių žemė. Ištraikė savo sūnus, stiprybės žemė. Tegu tavo vaikai eina, vien tai zorybės. Tegu dirba tavo naudai. Tegul saulė Lietuvos tamsumas prašalina. Ir tiesa mūsų žingsnius telydi. Dega mūsų širdyse, vardan tos Lietuvos vienybė težydi. Supporting God's
Greece have evolved over the 30 years, and to recognize the Greek personalities and institutions for their contribution to the development of this relationship in the area of diplomacy, economy, culture, sports, and people-to-people contacts. Now, our original plan was to do this with champagne during a proper diplomatic reception, but the coronavirus forced us to look for other ways to celebrate. Using this opportunity first, I would like to wish strength to all those directly affected by this terrible illness. We here in Greece were fortunate that the first wave of the COVID-19 was quickly contained thanks to the efforts of the government and mobilization and support of the entire population. As a result, Greece has rightly deserved the prize and appreciation from all over the world for the brilliant job. Lithuania has also done a good job. However, what's important in the context of this celebration is that the COVID has tested whether what we once had still exists. Specifically, I mean unity and sacrifice of the people and their belief in the state that they have created during those 30 years. And while Lithuanians didn't take to balconies and windows to uplift self-isolation amid quarantine as Greeks, Spaniards, or Italians did, kindness and the need to unite was manifested with all strength again. A number of communal coronavirus response initiatives, projects, and funds sprang to complement the measures that were taken by the government to combat the pandemic. More recently, unity and belief in freedom of
webinar is being conducted on Zoom platform and is being broadcasted live on Kedisa's YouTube page and the embassy's Facebook page. So we should have quite a big audience with us today. The founder and president of Kedisa, Dr. Andreas Banutsas, will say his introductory words shortly, but before that, let me just mention a couple of points. And I would like to start by extending a word of appreciation to all panelists who agreed to share their knowledge on this important but sometimes overlooked topic. As viewers can see from the program, we'll have speakers connecting in today from Athens, Warsaw, Vilnius, Helsinki, and Washington, as far as from Washington on this early morning hour. So this must be one of those positive side effects of the COVID-19 lockdown, because the surge of IT technologies in conduct of diplomacy, academic activities, and public events has allowed us to extend participation of people at various events beyond their home geolocation with lower cost and saving the precious time. Now, let me explain briefly why Kedisa and the Lithuanian embassy came up with this idea of hosting a webinar on nuclear energy. I think it's quite obvious. As the global demand for electricity grows, the demand for nuclear energy also increases. And with it, so does the number of nuclear projects on the global scale. Given its importance to global economy and countries, even those which have nothing to do from the first sight with the nuclear energy themselves, such as Greece, for instance, it's natural that it's necessary to raise awareness of the ongoing processes in nuclear energy field, and if they possess certain risks, to take appropriate measures to protect our interests. So when Dr. Banutsas and I sat down a couple of months ago to discuss the program, we came up with two most pressing issues related to the topic in question from our point of view. One having to do with the geopolitical and energy security aspects, and the other with the nuclear safety and the environmental issues. Of course, these issues are not new, but in the context of fragmented international systems, they become even more meaningful. Hence, the need to discuss it, to understand it, and to try to predict the course of future processes, including at our webinar. Now, one might ask why Lithuania has an interest in bringing up this topic. Well, Lithuania has consistently been raising energy security issues for many years. And nuclear energy is no different in that respect, as it can cause both positive and negative effects to energy security. Moreover, when in 2013, the Belarusian nuclear power plant started to take off just 25 kilometers from the border with Lithuania or Eastern EU border, safety and environmental issues of nuclear energy have also become increasingly important. Although in the case of the Belarusian nuclear power plant, the safety, energy security, and geopolitical issues of nuclear energy are intertwined. And although this webinar is not about this or any other particular nuclear power plant, I believe that Belarusian case will serve as a good case study to discuss various implications of nuclear energy. My final point is related to a need to have a joint response. It's clear that the various nuclear challenges require joint efforts by countries and other stakeholders that go beyond geographical boundaries and beyond ideological differences in relations to nuclear energy. Therefore, it's irrelevant in this case that Lithuania and Greece are located in the opposite sides of Europe. Problems and challenges are of European nature. Therefore, a response to them also must be European. So I will stop here now, and I'm passing this imaginable mic to my friend, President of Kedisa, Dr. Andreas Banucos.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, Dr. Rolandas Kaczynskas, dear friend Rolandas, thank you very much for proposing to Kedisa, and I think the result of this webinar will be very good also for the attendees, which, by the way, I welcome them too in our today webinar. I will not make some kind of introductory speech in the sense that you stated everything, the logic behind why we organized the webinar today. So I will just wanted to extend my thanks to you, to the Embassy of the Republic of Lithuania in Greece, you personally. And I think that, as you stated, this topic is very interesting, and it also affects the security in the broader sense, not only energy security, of not only Lithuania, which is in the northeast part of Europe, or Greece, which is in the southeast part, but also the entire European Union. So I wish everyone to have a nice morning and attend this interesting webinar. And I will pass now to Mr. Kostis Geropoulos, who's going to be the moderator of today's webinar. Mr. Kostis Geropoulos is an energy expert and a prolific writer on issues of energy. And of course, he has dealt a lot also with issues of nuclear energy and nuclear energy safety and security. And he's energy and Russian affairs editor in New Europe newspaper. So thank you, everybody, for participating in our today webinar. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for co-organizing this with Kedisa. And the word is now to Mr. Kostis Geropoulos to make also his introductory speech, and let's have the webinar started. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Ambassador. Energy security is one of the key issues, especially given the fact that the decarbonization efforts in the European Union and the goals of the EU to be CO2 free by 2050. This raises a lot of issues. How do you cover the demand for electricity? What will be the energy mix? Definitely, in the debate, nuclear energy is is considered one solution, especially given the climate conditions in some countries, and also the fact that in order to meet the electricity demand, you need an energy mix which maybe cannot only rely on renewables. And as gradually we reduce our demand, our consumption of oil and then eventually gas, nuclear could be a transition of energy. This, however, raises a lot of issues, not only of nuclear safety, but security and geopolitics. A lot of countries are concerned with plants built in the country or in neighboring countries, and the nuclear safety is a concern for everybody because it needs no borders. The plant can be existing a few kilometers away, and it's not. It concerns as much the citizens of the neighboring country as much as the country, the citizens of the country where the plant is built. We're going to be discussing several plants throughout Europe, and we have experts here in this panel that know a lot about nuclear safety, geopolitics, and security. I'm based in Athens, so obviously we have Akuyu plant built next door to Turkey. In the case of Lithuania, the Ostravets plant is built in neighboring Belarus. But we won't focus on specific cases. We're going to be discussing in general, and also discuss this issue concerning as a European issue and also as a global issue. I mean, we have obviously experts in the US, and it would be interesting to hear your perspective. So I think we can move ahead in the first panel, and talking about the US. The first speaker. I mean, I had the honor to briefly discuss it last week with Jane Nakano. This is the Senior Fellow Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center of Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. And talking about nuclear energy as geopolitical tool, Dr. Nakano, I understand you have quite a few things to share with us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to many of you. First off, thank you so much, Ambassador Kachinkas and also Dr. Benotsov for having me. So let me share the perspective of how the geopolitics of nuclear energy is changing. A confluence of economic, political, technological, and national security factors in the aftermath of World War II enabled the United States to emerge as a leading force in global nuclear commerce, as a supplier of nuclear reactors, services like refueling and maintenance. And these factors also enable the United States to become a leading voice on nuclear safety and non-proliferation issues. But today, the United States has roughly 95 operating commercial nuclear reactors, and we still have the largest commercial fleet in the world. However, as the natural gas prices remain relatively low, thanks to the shale gas revolution, although obviously oil gas prices are quite cyclical in nature, but then also ever cheaper renewables and also the power demand being fairly low in the United States, nuclear sector has been under pressure. Since 2013, roughly 12 reactors have permanently shut down in the United States. Several more units are planned for closure through 2025 or so, middle of this coming decade, while only 2 new units are under construction, and they're about to come online in the next couple of years, but we only have 2 under construction in the United States. As for the exports, there are currently no U.S. reactor under construction outside the United States, although the U.S. continues to promote civilian nuclear exports, including small modular reactors, as they become fully commercialized later this decade. This relative decline of the U.S. leadership in the global nuclear commerce is happening when Russia is boosting its dominance in new reactor sales, and China is striving to become a leader in the global nuclear commerce. Russia's nuclear industry suffered a serious reputational setback following the Chernobyl accident in 1986, but it has since managed a remarkable comeback. Between 2009 and 2018, Russia accounted for about half of 53 units under construction around the world, including projects in Bangladesh, Belarus, Finland, Slovakia, Turkey, and Ukraine. According to its 2018 annual report, Rosatom has over 133 billion US dollars in overseas orders in its 10-year portfolio. Meanwhile, China's domestic nuclear sector has seen a remarkable expansion that hints at the country's potential to become a leading global supplier. China did not have a nuclear power plant until 1991. However, between 2011 and 2019, China brought 35 new reactor units online at home. Although the Fukushima accident of 2011 tempered China's original robust expansion vision, China's capacity expansion targets remain quite strong. Its commercial fleet will likely overtake France within next few years, and the United States by 2030. As for export, Pakistan is the only host to Chinese reactors thus far. But in order to rectify this situation, Chinese firms are pursuing a number of nuclear power projects around the world, including in Argentina, Brazil, the Czech Republic, Kenya, Malaysia, Thailand, Turkey, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia. Until recent years, the United States' leadership in nuclear reactor technology was a factor that served as a decisive determinant in the eyes of countries that are considering introducing nuclear power projects, some of them for the first time. But this technological edge is beginning to be outweighed by Russian and Chinese deals that combine good enough technologies with attractive financing that is outside the bounds of OECD regulations, as neither of them is an OECD member. They have offered financing that is large in total amount provided, cheap with low interest rates, and long-lived with long repayment periods. And both have also tended to be willing to invest equity in these nuclear projects overseas. These factors may make deals commercially unsound in market-led capitalist terms, as in the United States. However, under the state-led export model of Russia and China, an engineering procurement construction contract, EPC contract, that barely breaks even may still be viable if the deal enables profits through other aspects over multiple decades. Like provision of fuel supply, spare parts, and operating services, and tend to be commercially low risk with strong profit margins. Nuclear commerce entails not only a multi-year effort for reactor construction, but also an ongoing relationship between the supplier country and recipient country regarding fuel supplies and reactor maintenance. So as such, nuclear commerce serves to create or maintain diplomatic, commercial, and institutional relationships. And therefore, the link between nuclear commerce and geopolitics exists on multiple levels. In Russia's case, the government has seen strategic value in energy exports as early as 2003. Key parts of Russia's national security establishment view civilian nuclear exports as an important tool for projecting influence overseas. For example, the Russian nuclear power project in Hungary is bolstering Russia's relevance in European affairs. A member of the European Union since 2004, Hungary is adding 2 new Russian reactors at the Paks site that was originally built by Soviet Russia. The government of Viktor Orban support for Russian favored energy projects like the South Stream and Turkish Stream gas projects may be due in part to Russia's very generous loan for the 12 billion euro project. Nuclear energy exports have become a tool to preserve Russia's relevance in world politics as well. Russia's nuclear project at Akkuyu in Turkey has a strategic value to Russia in that the project has complicated diplomatic relations between the United States and Turkey, which is a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The Akkuyu project, which was agreed upon in 2010, seeks to become Turkey's first nuclear power project on the build, own, operate model by the early 2020s. Under the build, own, operate model, Russia would not only build, but also own and operate the plant, thereby bearing all the financial construction and operating and country risks. This arrangement aims to remove many technical and regulatory barriers that a nuclear newcomer like Turkey may encounter in introducing nuclear energy. Despite being an opposing sides over in places like Syria, Libya, and now Nagorno-Karabakh, Unit 1 of the Akkuyu project is scheduled to be completed by 2023, and the Turkish authority issued construction permit for Unit 3 just a couple weeks ago. The Turkish embrace of a Russian-owned nuclear power plant on its own soil could raise a serious security concern to the United States and its NATO allies. How would the NATO respond if a foreign power attacked the Russian-owned reactor on NATO member land? What would be the rights and obligations of NATO in response if Russia responded to such an attack with military deployment in Turkey? The geopolitical implications may be equally significant for Chinese involvement in the United Kingdom. Then Prime Minister David Cameron welcomed partnership with the Chinese state-owned nuclear company and EDF of France in the middle of the last decade as the UK government sought to preserve its commercial nuclear fleet as a key means to reducing the power sector emissions. Part of the deal is to allow China to build a Chinese design reactor, Hualong 1, at a proposed Bradwell site in Essex in the United Kingdom. Hualong 1, which is China's flagship reactor for exports, has been before the UK regulator for design review since early 2017 and just entered, or not just, but entered a fourth and final stage in the assessment process this February. Chinese are sought to covet the approval by the highly regarded UK nuclear regulators as it could help launch Hualong 1 reactor globally, including in the advanced industrialized economies. Since July of this year, when UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson decided to phase out Huawei's 5G technology from the UK telecommunications network, the future of Chinese engagement in the UK nuclear sector has become highly uncertain. Huawei was banned despite pressure from China, including a warning from China's ambassador to the United Kingdom that the ban could have an adversarial effect on Chinese involvement in the UK nuclear power projects. If the project proceeds, the United Kingdom will be the first leading OECD economy to allow investment into its nuclear power plants by a country that has been labeled by the European Union as a systemic rival promoting alternative models of governance. So how much geopolitical leverage can nuclear commerce create? Whether nuclear energy deals accord supplier countries geopolitical leverage similar to pipeline natural gas deals is a frequent point of debate. Some believe that the relative dearth of nuclear fuel manufacturers and exporters make nuclear fuel provision a more potent tool for foreign policy influence. They explain that the oil and gas risks are primarily short-lived or short-term shocks, which can be dealt by strategies such as excess storage and supplier diversification, whereas nuclear power risks entail long-term dependencies. But others see the analogy to be inaccurate, as nuclear power plants do not require an uninterrupted supply of fuel or particular infrastructure for transportation the way that thermal power plants do, making it less vulnerable to political manipulation. Nuclear power technologies and fuels are highly proprietary, but nuclear fuel can be sourced from an alternative supplier, although it is complex and costly. For example, Ukraine has been receiving Westinghouse nuclear fuel since 2005, that is compatible with its Russian reactors as the country seeks to reduce dependence on Russia. By 2025, Westinghouse will be delivering nuclear fuel to 7 of Ukraine's 15 nuclear reactors. The export of nuclear technologies and services is central to Russia's effort to maintain relevance in global affairs, as the country has limited means to underpin such efforts. Meanwhile, nuclear export aspiration is largely part of China's effort to enhance its economic influence around the world. While the underlying factors may differ, the two supplier countries from the state-led capitalist tradition are beginning to shape the future of global nuclear commerce. Whether the United States succeeds in restoring its competitiveness in the global nuclear commerce has significant geopolitical implications and therefore warrants a close attention. And let me wrap up my remarks and look forward to exchange with other panelists as well as questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nakano. For those interesting comments, we can definitely discuss this after our introductory speeches, and I would like your opinion also a lot about, how countries can use the supply of nuclear fuel and also strategically loans, like we've seen with China, for example, to inject influence in different parts of the world. Now, with our next speaker is Ms. Hannah Smith. She's the Director of Research and Analysis of the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats in Helsinki. We are going to be, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts about also about this global safety and geopolitics of nuclear energy. I've been to Helsinki many times, and I've also visited the plant up in Pyhäjoki in Finland, which is actually supplied by by Fennovoima, but also from Rosatom. So Russia is becoming a player there as well. If you can go ahead, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak in this very interesting webinar. I am trying, let's see if it works, to share a screen. I cannot share the screen. Never mind, I can do this even without it. It might have been a little bit more, I suppose, clearer to you, but we can do it this way too. I think the previous presentation and my presentation will complement each other, because there is a big question relating to this kind of the field that I work in, relating to hybrid threats, which is not a very clear concept. Geopolitics is a clearer concept, and everybody quite quickly understands what's going on there. I think these two are complementary and a little bit perhaps on other side of the coin almost, in the way that when looking at energy security from the hybrid threat perspective, it is more to do with the fact how perhaps this whole environment relating to nuclear energy, with the power plants, the projects, the companies, international politics relating to it, what kind of an opportunities that kind of entails to countries that are not necessarily always very keen openly to discuss about their goals and the ways how they want to try to interfere or influence. This is what hybrid threats really are about. It is a kind of almost like a shadow action behind the more open policies. The goals relating to hybrid threats are never openly declared. I think in geopolitics, it's much easier to connect the issues, to connect the China's action to China's interest, to enhance their economic interest, to try to capture a market space relating to Russia's Rosatom and so on. So, but I think already in the previous presentation, the connection with these different companies to the state is important. And it is important to then also realize that what type of goals or objectives are in the shadows. But I suppose first I need to slightly introduce what at least us in a hybrid COE, the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, mean by hybrid threats. We do use the hybrid threats as a Western concept. We are not claiming that this is the concept has origins in Russia or China or any other authoritarian state, but we see that as a concept created by the Western countries to describe the security challenge or threat they see for the 21st century. It is talked about that when this kind of an issue happens, it is coordinated and synchronized action that deliberately seeks to target different democratic states and institution systemic vulnerabilities. This is what makes it perhaps slightly different. And the argument is made quite strongly that authoritarian states have a different way and a different strategic culture that supports that when it comes to trying to interfere and influence compared to the democratic states. We are not saying that the democratic states are not doing it. What we are saying is that the mechanism, the tradition, the strategic culture behind it is very different, and therefore also perhaps the tactics are. When we're referring to the hybrid threat action, or an activity, we are talking about a mechanism that tries to exploit different types of thresholds of detection and attribution, and also very strongly different interfaces, kind of create, I think in US vocabulary quite often talks about gray zones. So anything kind of between war and peace, friend, enemy, internal, external, anywhere that there is a type of a gray zone that could be exploited. And the aim for this kind of action is to influence different forms of decision making, whether it is a local, regional, state, institutional level, or even, in fact, in an individual, depending on where the individual, of course, is, and how important they are for the bigger picture. And while this activity is going on, the idea is to gain the actors' strategic goals while undermining and or hurting basically the target. And this is what we really mean by hybrid threats, and definitely the kind of type of action, characterization of the action that is behind the hybrid threats. So why then nuclear energy? Well, there was a lot of mentioning already about nuclear energy. It kind of is quite clear that nuclear energy is not only a national issue. Oil and gas, because of the pipelines, the logistics, which are clearer, more tangible, you can kind of see where the pipeline is going, or you can talk about the logistical transport lines when it comes to oil and so on. Nuclear energy is not that clear, but I think it has also become quite clear that this is not only a national issue, and it does cross borders. And therefore, this kind of all the opportunities that exist for any kind of an interference, priming of influence and so on, are grounds for where hybrid threat lenses should be, in fact, turned to. So the growing dependencies in different levels, exactly, I think already the previous presentation mentioned this thing, the long-term dependencies, whether nuclear energy can be exploited from outside, or is it a safer? I think this is a debate, and it's a good debate, and it should continue, basically. But there is clearly that issue of dependencies, and dependencies are issues that can be always also used in a malign way. There is also the growing role of private entities and companies in energy politics, but we need to understand what type of companies they are, and specifically if they are linked to the authoritarian state. The state-company relationship is very different there than in the democratic states. We also have this interconnectedness in the world, which is increasing all the time. And when a competition among great powers and regional hegemons is definitely increasing also, then all the areas become also a battleground. Geopolitics is clearly playing into it, but when, and is a good concept to look at it through, but when we are trying to look at also the hybrid threat lenses through them, then we can kind of see that this competition issue is in fact bringing even more possibilities and enhances the way how different states uses it. So why I'm here and the based on thing is that we published last year a report, which was a joint effort with 3 other Center of Excellencies, NATO credited one, the NSEC in energy security in Lithuania, the Stratcom COE in Riga, NATO credited, and also the Cybersecurity Center in Tallinn. This initiative came from the Lithuanians, and we used 3 case studies to try to track what type of action and activity are linked to different projects. There was the Astravets nuclear power plant in Belarus, the PAX projects in Hungary, and the Hanhikivi power plant project in Finland. The common denominator of all of those case studies was, of course, that Rosatom is part of all of them. It was analyzing the potential really on the hybrid threats. And this is always needed to remember that the projects are business projects. They are kind of energy security, national energy policy related projects. But the question of that, what is the potential to misuse these projects is really there. And I think the case studies really gave us quite good kind of empirical evidence. Also very important was to try to identify what is not a threat in this one. So what is the potential threat, what is not a threat, and what type of a bigger context it is. Some of the observations on from the reports I can paste then onto the chat, the link to the report. It is a fully kind of public report. So observations on the report is that when it comes to the kind of looking at the threat through the hybrid threat lenses, there is a lot which plays with also psychology, how you create a kind of a frame for something where you then can maneuver or use it for your own advantage. And in nuclear energy, one of the factors is really the fear factor, the perception of a strong threat. And this has a huge potential in information side, first of all, to disinformation. And then second is to societal polarization and even a destabilization campaigns, meaning that get people disagree inside of a country and then get them to the streets and protest, but perhaps not anymore very peacefully. Then there is also the clash between different business cultures in the way that if the actor is from authoritarian state, which has a very different starting point on business culture than they in a democratic state. So there is a possibility that, or potential attempts to undermine the rule of law. Then the state in question needs to be very, very alert in this case. Also the fact that there can be a challenging administrative culture inside of the country, in the way that someone says, okay, we are not yet there for the safety rules but if you just sign this paper, we will fix it later. And this, of course, might go specifically against a culture that usually does everything in advance. And now I'm, in fact, referring to the Finnish case very strongly. And it also can enhance the division that usually natural partners have, but try to get natural partners and cooperative partners away from each other. Then there is the creating financial dependencies. That means that in long-term way, different leverages and different vulnerabilities can be built that can be used later on. Not necessarily there, it is very much priming, all legal, but how that whole thing can and kind of turn against you if you're not very careful. When it comes to the national security, there is a strong historical evidence that these type of projects are quite often linked to intelligence operations. So using a smokescreen and also for military buildup. And I think Astrovec is a good example here in the way that how quite a lot of, in fact, military buildup has been connected to the power plant. And that obviously then plays to the psychological side of creating a fear, perhaps even kind of pushing some to make wrong type of decisions that harm themselves and so on. Very much in tradition of Russia's reflexive control. And then the fact that these power plants are not necessarily isolated islands, even if it's been seen quite often also like that. But the network relating to those can actually be seen as a weakness or also as a strength. Depends on how you manage to use it. And then my final observations are relating to Rosatom as a company, because that was one of them, the common denominator on the case studies. So what we also saw very much that the company does not have a solid one approach, but it's a very kind of tailor-made and takes into consideration the specificities of each country in both good and perhaps in a questionable way, in the way that to seeking the vulnerabilities and trying to use them very strongly, but not the same way in different case studies. Also, the huge factor here is that the question of how even if it's a independent or private company, so to speak, how independent it is when it is connected to authoritarian state. It is fully dependent on Russia's will to how it can operate, since it's connected to Russian state. Therefore, it is connected to a state-supervised system, which definitely wants to control the business, and especially those which are counted as strategic industries. And nuclear industry is one of those. So we need to remember then, and this is in fact, whether it is Chinese or Russian or any other for a company related to an authoritarian state, is that these countries have also laws that require these companies to work for the state if the state so sees it. So that makes it in a way that nuclear energy sector industry and the work that is done relating to that is also an area that needs to be looked at it through the hybrid threat lenses to be able to see where the real threats are, where is the covert ways of interfering and influencing the potentials, but also then realizing that perhaps these are issues that can be dealt with if we are careful and also make sure that we continue, we as a democratic states, to put the stress on the rule of law and the way how we see that norms should be respected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith, for this very interesting presentation. I mean, the potential of hybrid threats. As you mentioned, geopolitics is a lot clearer. I've covered oil and gas for a long time, and you know where the pipelines go through exactly. And the exert of influence is a lot more obvious. Since we're going to go to the questions after the speeches, but I would like for you to think about also the EU potential for how the EU could, as a whole, be able to tackle hybrid threats, and also maybe we'll get to the 3 cases that you studied a little bit later, also with Ostrovets, PAX, and Hankikivi. Our next speaker is also on the same topic. Is from Kedisa, who's organizing this conference together with the Lithuanian Embassy. It's Themistoklis Zanidis. He is an analyst for the Center for International Strategic Analysis. Themistoklis.
Good morning, Mr. Geropoulos. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Banoutsos and Mr. Ambassador for the invitation in this interesting webinar. I have prepared a presentation which I'm going to share with you right now. Give me a second. You can see it. I hope you do.
Yes, you can see it.
Thank you very much. So, the presentation is about how nuclear energy can be used by ambitious powers as a geopolitical tool to upgrade their position within the international system. The case study to be considered is Turkey, which revisionism policy has recently been exerted in the Southeast Mediterranean region, the Caucasus, Libya, and Syria as well. Turkey's strategic goal is to become a hegemonic power by overturning the status quo. Thus, as a revisionist power, it uses international law and its international obligations for its convenience. One of the pillars of Turkish policy, less prominent from obvious reasons, is nuclear energy and its stated desire to develop nuclear arsenal. The aforementioned is part of Ankara's strategic goal to become a dominant power within the Islamic world, as well as a regional power. This ambition is substantive since it has been expressed by many Turkish officials, including the current president of the country, Mr. Erdogan, who has stated his desire for Turkey to become a nuclear power. So, Turkey has the highest rate of growing energy demand among OECD countries over the last 15 years. So the 2 key elements of the country's energy strategy can be summarized as follows. First, taking into account increasing energy demand and import dependency, priority region among energy supply security related activities, and secondly, expanding research and development activities on energy technologies. This is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Turkish Republic. So in this scope, the following goals are aimed, and I want everyone to focus on the third goal, which is adding nuclear to Turkey's energy mix. So Turkey continues its efforts to increase the share of renewable energy sources and to add the nuclear power to its energy mix in order to reduce its energy import dependency, to maximize the use of indigenous resources and combating climate change. Hence, the Turkish government decided to build 2 nuclear power plants, one at the area of Akuyu, so please forgive me for my Turkish, at Mersin region in Turkey's Mediterranean coast opposite Cyprus. I want to see it right here where my cursor is. And the other at Sinop here in the Black Sea. Please keep in mind the third one at the European part of the country. So in the 2011 and 2013, Turkey signed a contract with the Russian Rosatom and the French-Korean consortium regarding the constructions of 2 nuclear power plants in the region of Mersin and Sinop, respectively, worth approximately of $42 billion. In 2017, has announced that until 2030, totally three nuclear power plants will be put into operation, with Ahmet Davutoglu stating that the third will be 100% Turkish-made. Remember at the European part of the country, the third one. So the construction by Rosatom of a nuclear reactor in the Mersin region will allow both Turkish industry and the scientists of the country to deal with the nuclear energy sector, gaining valuable experience. The plant will be made up of 4 units with capacity of 1,200 megawatts each. Here, this is from the official Twitter account of Rosatom Global. And as you can see, in 10 or 15 days ago, the Unit 1 was delivered to the site, the Akuyu power plant, I mean. So, what about Akuyu and the S-400 anti-aircraft missile system? Another important issue refers to the means of protection of Turkey's nuclear power plants from a hypothetical preemptive strike. Mesut Haki Kazin, a retired Air Force officer and professor of international relations at the Turkish Air Force Academy in Istanbul, told Sputnik Turkey. This is his words, exactly his words. As you know, Turkey and Russia are implementing the Akuyu nuclear power plant joint project. A nuclear power plant is a vital installation from a military strategic point of view. In this regard, I believe that the S-400 systems will be effectively used to protect this nuclear power plant. Turkey has decided to purchase these units, keeping in mind these considerations. So this may answer to the persistence of the Turkish president to acquire the Russian-made missile system despite the US sanctions. Only you can remember the ejection of Turkey from the F-35 stealth fighter project. However, this is something that Turkey decided with no previous consultations with the other states of the regions. Furthermore, the construction of a nuclear power plant in the earthquake zone at Akuyu has sounded the alarm in other states, including Greece, which suffers from earthquakes in annual basis. Remember the most recent earthquake which hit the island of Samos and Smyrna, which caused deaths from both countries. So the contingency of a nuclear disaster should be taken under consideration. And I want to remind to you, the Akuyu power plant is approximately here, which is nearby the seismic earthquake zone. So, recently, Mr. Dendias, the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has stated the following. There is a nuclear power plant in Akuyu. Turkey has not spoken to anyone in the region. If this factory explodes tomorrow morning, will only Turkey pay for it? So there are a number of issues, of course, and environmental issues. The Turkish nuclear power plants are perilous not only because they are built on a seismogenic area, but also the anticipation for Turkey to develop nuclear weapon afterwards. This is a map from Arms Control Association, which shows the nuclear powers and its arsenal nowadays. I want to focus on Israel and Pakistan. So we have some facts. The first fact is Turkey agreement on the construction of 2 nuclear power plants. The second is the development of its military industry, which emphasizes in the missile capabilities. The third is Turkey cooperation with Pakistan, which is already a nuclear power. So if Turkey finally manages to complete the construction of those nuclear factories, it will be literally only a few months before acquiring its own nuclear arsenal. Turkey will have the nuclear option, as we say in the nuclear strategy. The latter is a term of nuclear strategy which recommends the possibility of acquiring nuclear weapons up to 12 months after the relevant decision is taken. So nuclear choice either arises as a result of a conscious political decisions, the case of Turkey, or is natural consequence of a peaceful nuclear program. I want to talk a little bit more about nuclear strategy. So the nuclear option sometimes is the best choice given it offers an ideal combination of and avoiding sanctions from the international community. I think that it's the best choice for Turkey right now. So here are some pros for some advantages for Turkey's nuclearizations. The first is nuclear threat from Israel, Iran, or even Russia. Turkey's insecurity on the conventional level, fear of the strategic encirclement due to the Serb syndrome, ambition to achieve regional hegemony, and the hegemony in the Muslim world. blackmail of non-nuclear opponents, for example, Greece or even Egypt, geographical proximity to the core area of the Middle East, improving countries' military position within NATO, pursuit of a political military dependence as a candidate regional power, mainly from United States and the European Union, the international recognition, especially within the Muslim world, technological modernization, and boost the morale of Turkish people, and cost saving of conventional forces. Nonetheless, the nuclearization of Turkey is not simple due to the international community, which is strongly opposes against this scenario. The reason it can be shown in the picture above, which shows the range of the future Turkish nuclear threat in the region by Turkey's made missiles of 2,500 kilometers range. As you can see, Turkey will, in some years from now, will able to launch a missile from its soil and reach even Paris. So, Turkey faces problems with even its allies. In fact, Turkey actions in the region forced even one of Russia's larger public energy companies, Interrau, to withdraw from building the country's first nuclear power plant. And this decision was probably following tensions between Moscow and Ankara over issues including the conflict in Syria, Libya, and more recently the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Now, I'm going to talk about the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the famous NPT, which is one serious obstacle for Turkey's nuclear intentions. Here I give some general informations, and I want to focus on that the treaty was signed in 1968 between the three nuclear powers at the time, United Kingdom, United States, and Soviet Union. The treaty entered into force into 1970 and lasted for 25 years. And the treaty was maintained beyond the original 25 years old provisions when in 1995, almost all United Nations member states signed its indefinite extensions. In fact, in 2007, only 3 countries had not yet signed it, India, Israel, and Pakistan, while only North Korea signed it first and then abandoned it. Okay, let's move. So this treaty is unique, as it's uniquely unequal. As it's obliged not nuclear powers, the vast majority of UN member states to refrain from developing nuclear weapons, while at the same time allowing nuclear powers to maintain their arsenal. So why is happening that? This obvious injustice was agreed upon as non-nuclear powers, at least at the time of the signing, had neither the ability nor the desire to develop nuclear weapons. However, the nuclear powers, in exchange for maintaining their arsenal, would provide their know-how to other states to develop nuclear technology for peaceful uses. Here I have written some cons, some disadvantages for Turkey's nuclearization. The country's alliance with major nuclear powers, for example, United States, the reactions of other nuclear powers to the possibility of Turkey's nuclearization, including economic measures to the fragile Turkish economy, the possibility of nuclearization of other rival forces to balance Turkish power, for example, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, even Egypt. This may lead to a nuclear arms race in the region with catastrophic results. The possibility of preemptive strike against the country by other forces. We've seen that in the past, the Israeli preemptive strike at Iraq. The international legal consequences by the United Nations or EU. The reputation of the peace-loving country that respects the international law, okay, and eternal sanctions. Turkey, driven by the new Ottoman doctrine, constitutes a realistic threat for the entire region. President Erdogan and other officials have declared their intention to transform Turkey into a nuclear power via nuclear energy and weapons. So, given the distance between nuclear power plants and the development of nuclear arsenal, which is literally 12 months, as nuclear option suggests, the latter, the nuclearization of Turkey consists an unacceptable hazard for the region's balance of power, not to mention the environmental issues. So this is the references, and this is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zanidis. And now we have a little bit over half an hour for questions and also a dialogue. I mean, I have some things that came to mind and I'd like to ask the panelists, but what I would like, will be interesting is to also have a dialogue between us, and if any of the speakers have questions for the other speakers, that would be also very interesting.
Mr. Geropoulos, may I make a comment?
Yeah.
Please? Actually, to answer a question of one of the attendees who's asking if we will have any feedback on the presentations on paper. Well, this webinar is recorded, so we're going to have it published, let's say, all the webinar recorded on a YouTube channel of Kedisa. So whoever wishes to look at it again, you can visit the YouTube channel. I'm not sure if the speakers would like to share their presentations with all of the attendees. A good method, because Mrs. Hadji Gabriel is asking this question, is to watch again the whole webinar recorded in Kedisa's YouTube channel. Thank you. This was my answer to. Okay, now Mrs. Hadji Gabriel is asking if we can write down the channel. Well, you just have to go to Kedisa's website, kedisa.gr, and then you will see the link to YouTube channel. Just click on that.
I'm just asking how Kedisa is writing. That's why I'm writing down.
Sorry, Mrs. Gabriel.
The spelling of Kedisa.
Yes, okay. I will put it down to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Geropoulos, Mr. Geropoulos, okay, please. Thank you for allowing me to make this intervention.
Sure, Andreas. So staying on the geopolitics issue, we see that we have countries which obviously have national companies, and in this case, it's very easy to see what kind of policy they're following. And then we have, obviously in the case in the US with Westinghouse, and we saw that how Mr. Nakano mentioned about reducing the reliance on fuel in Ukraine, and we're seeing this, but they are a private enterprise. And I was wondering what the potential for geopolitics, if it's and also for hybrid threats, if it's a lot higher in the case of countries which have state entities and versus private sector and so forth, and how easy it will be to influence and exert influence in other countries, or in terms of supplying the nuclear fuels. So it's Nakano, if you want to start. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. So I would say that it is much harder to coordinate with these private companies in the United States. In part, as I mentioned during the remarks, that each country just sees its particular segment in this long value chain. And also there is also shareholder pressure on many of these Western companies, including the United States. However, I should note that during the latter half of the Trump administration, the US government has become much more active in working with US private companies, and sometimes with Canadian companies and other Western companies as well, to have more integrated approach. What I mean by that is often countries, especially new countries that do not yet have nuclear energy projects that are interested in introducing, they found it harder to work with the United States because there are all these different companies that they have to individually negotiate with. So, in contrast, the Russians and Chinese have just, usually just one point of entry, and then they tend to coordinate sort of its own national companies in a deal. So in order to address that sort of a challenge associated with countries selecting to go with the United States, the United States government has been much more proactive. However, as Dr. Smith has also mentioned, I think it is quite different when companies do not have obligation to the state, whether through the funding or budgetary means, or even in China's case, most of the head of national nuclear companies also have senior status in the Chinese Communist Party and so forth. Without that sort of linkage, I think the degree to which that state can have its will imposed upon companies, and therefore use companies as actor or agent in advancing national interests is quite different.
Ms. Smith, you mentioned that in the case of Rosatom, that they tailor their methods to different countries. And I was wondering, since you studied the Belarusian plant, also PAX in Hungary, and in your case, which in your country, in Finland, in Hanviki, if this is, if, for example, in Finland, it's very different in the case of the other plants in safety issues, and in terms of also how much control Finland has versus the other plants, and how less of an influence they can exert on Finland, for example.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I suppose a lot of the answers are in the report, and I did send the link now into the chat. So anyone who wants to get more acquainted on the report, that's where you'll find it now. So relating to this control, so for example, in Finland anyway, the public debate relating to nuclear energy is very different, for example, when it is in Astravets. So that's one of the issues that Rosatom tried to very much play into the public debate. What was interesting about it was that in both sides, both pro nuclear energy and against nuclear energy. So there was a tract that both of these groups, in fact, had a certain backing that eventually, when you trace the line back, went not directly to Rosatom, but to Russia. So the pro-nuclear energy was quite clearly to Rosatom, but the negative one was not so clearly linked with Rosatom, but the line went, in fact, to some Russian actors. And that was a highly interesting one, which we found it. And we're kind of thinking also that, okay, what's the logic here? Why would the same actor basically be supporting pro and anti groups? But this comes down to the fact that to find the polarization aspects, how you could possibly use the issue of nuclear energy to destabilize a situation in a country or even in one kind of region, if you so want to. So again, I'm not saying that this is what is happening or that this is even a goal, but the possibility, the potential is there, and the way how it was done was quite kind of a interesting way. There was also these attempts to bypass some of kind of the Finnish standard laws or rules. Exactly this method of saying, we will do it, but now because the timetable is so tight, it is in both our interests, let's just kind of sign this thing and take that issue later, which is not the way how things are done in Finland. But it's very tempting to get the process kind of forward. So there was an attempt also to divert from that factor. And then there was also, again, try to speed up the process. This was one of the things relating to Finland, which was also an interesting one, that why there is, if you are strategically committed, why so kind of a hurry and trying not to do everything by the book, so to speak. So also the ownership issue, because Finland issued a quite strong ruling in the way that there needs to be a high percentage on Finnish kind of ownership. So they kind of found a company that would kind of come into it, but eventually it had traces to Balkans. And then when you dig culture that is in Finland to do the business, these kind of interesting aspects relating to the public debate and so on. In Astravets case, for example, it's a clear cut that the military aspect is there, because Russia has I mean, that would not work at all in the Finnish case, probably not in the Hungarian case either. So, but in Astravets, they were able to do it in the way that there is a Russian kind of a military experts and specialists, but also equipment to secure the Astravets power plant. But if you look at the location of it, it's quite interesting, and so on. When it comes to the Hungarian case, which was also a little bit on the Belarus, but again different, relating to the financing and so on. So you can find the different instruments play. The public debate one would not have any almost utility inside of the Belarus, possibly outside, specifically when it comes to the regions close by. So that's the kind of, but that's not Rosatom who's then doing it, the possibility of using the narratives kind of outside of Belarus. So it depends on, again, if you're looking at exactly just the country or if you're looking at cascading effects. So this is kind of, I think there needs to be done much more studies to comparing the different projects, different countries, but perhaps same actors, because only through that we can in fact really kind of connecting the dots and see patterns, and then also realize where we just should say, because quite often also the countering hybrid threats is easy if you understand where the potential threat is. If you don't understand it, which is the meaning of the whole thing, then you might make the wrong decisions, which in fact favor the other side. Thank you.
Mr. Zanidis, you mentioned the danger of, in this case, with proliferation, and also we've seen that you mentioned that the S-400s are maybe used to safeguard their plants. How can nuclear energy lead to a conflict, you think, or is, in this case, also instability in the region?
Well, thank you for the questions. We're talking about Turkey. The unique Turkey is a unique case because it has ambitions to become the regional power. So Turkey has been using international law for its convenience. Everybody have seen that in the past few months. In these terms, Turkey is going to use the Non-Proliferation Nuclear Weapons Treaty in order to develop nuclear power plants for peaceful uses. However, Turkey's officials have stated that their ultimate goal is to develop nuclear arsenal, and that's why it's very, very tricky if Turkey manages to acquire nuclear power plants for peaceful uses. Then it's going to be only 1 year, maybe less, from acquiring nuclear weapons, and that's the most serious about this about the Turkish case, in my opinion. I mean that nuclear energy is the first step in order to acquire nuclear weapons for Turkey.
There are many organizations guarding nuclear proliferation and nuclear. But I was wondering, what do you think? How big of a risk is actually nuclear proliferation from a plant versus, obviously, there's a lot of talk about how to guard nuclear weapons and all the dangers of falling in the wrong hands. But how actually feasible is that? There is the danger of nuclear proliferation or a terrorist threat for nuclear plants in the cases that we mentioned.
In the case of Turkey?
No. In the case, I'm saying about in the plants that we mentioned in general. I mean, in Europe, in the European plants, yeah, and in the U.S., of course.
Sure. And thank you for the question. So. I don't consider myself to be non-proliferation expert, but I mean there is always the theft of radioactive materials that a lot of nuclear experts are very much work to prevent. But I mean I think it's almost like if you do have nuclear energy program, then I think Dr. Zandis is right that it takes both intent and capacity. And once you have the capacity site, or then and if you already have pre-existing intent to develop one, I think it's the risk is infinitely higher, I would think, but I think that's why there is both. There's a multilateral non-proliferation architecture that's been put in place. IAEA is definitely one of them. Also, there are organizations such as WANO that are based on the operator side of the efforts. I mean, I think it certainly takes multiple dimensions. One thing that I wanted to mention that sort of connects back to the previous round of questions and answers is that looking at all these companies, whether it's Rosatom or China National Nuclear or China Guangdong or any other companies, most companies that do sell these goods and services and nuclear reactors and fuels, they do not want to see non-proliferation becoming an issue. I mean, it damages their business case. And so there's and so in many cases, when we purely look at how companies approach, I think that regardless of where these companies are from, they have, they do, go along with all these, intergovernmental agreements and also sometimes multilateral agreements that do sets up, things like inspection and certainly, design review. However, I think when it, where the challenge lies is when things get rushed because a nation may have interest in seeing things that could be done quicker, whereas again, regardless of the type of country, I think most companies want to see things that go successfully so that they can continue to sell their goods and services to other countries or continue to have a successful business in existing nuclear markets.
Mrs. Smith, in terms of the EU level, what can be done on a pan-European level to counter hybrid threats?
Okay, thank you very much for the question, but that was not a small question, by the way. If you ask that, what can be done in a general, in a big EU level to counter hybrid threats?
On studies.
Yeah, I think we would need several webinars on just that topic. But when it comes to perhaps the energy side and the nuclear one, because it is in the first and foremost, it's a national issue. And it is, to be frank, it has been to get kind of energy policies lined up inside of the EU. is not an easy task due to the fact that each country, depending on the location, the way how the size of the country, size of the people, all of it, how they plan their energy mix. And therefore also it is very difficult to go and say to someone, oh no, you cannot do that type of an energy mix or something like that, because it is a national decision ultimately. And this is a challenge for the EU. I think in perhaps in a global terms, it can also be seen as a challenge. But what I could say in general terms, it is the fact that when it comes to, for example, not security of supply aspects, but the security from the perspective of how secure are, for example, pipelines so that they are not leaking, or how secure is oil tankers, or how secure is nuclear power plant issues, and the kind of a whole process that what includes to it. So to really try to enhance the fact that we have a certain regulations that needs to be fulfilled. There might even be this monopoly regulations that needs to be looked into it in the way that not one company can rule the whole situation, which is almost a common sense in the way that if you put all of your eggs in the one basket and the basket falls, you are not in a good position. So therefore, at least have several baskets with several eggs in each basket, then you are more secure. So I think this is not that kind of a difficult, and that type of a role the EU could have for its definitely on its member states to remind why regulations are boring, they slow down things, but there is a security aspect to it. So in that way, to remind everybody why regulation is important, what are the regulations, and to make sure that at least the EU member countries do promote that even globally, because if we do take care of that, we all are a little bit safer. Thank you.
Ms. Nakano, you are also in charge of the climate change program in DC, and I was thinking in terms of, since we're in the issue of energy security, as the countries are really struggling some unevenly to meet their climate goals, and so how much of a factor does nuclear energy play into their in terms of meeting their energy goals, and how can they balance that versus the risks of nuclear energy as well?
Thank you for another important question. I think as countries seek to reduce the emissions from its economy, not just power sector, but industrial and transportation sector, I think I think nuclear needs to play its part. In the United States, under the Biden administration, that will coming in effect in January, as the United States will be looking to eliminate, I think, carbon sources in the power sector by 2035. Renewables alone probably, most likely, or most definitely almost, will not get you there in the pace that it needs to be. It's both the question of scale and pace. And what's interesting is that, at least in the United States, a lot of environmental organizations that have been traditionally opposed to nuclear and promoted almost renewables, 100% renewables approach, have been starting to change the stance as they start to recognize how pressing the challenge of climate change is. So the conversation is definitely changing within the United States about the viability of nuclear energy in the power source, and of course, and then that really also affects how in balance how the nuclear industry sees its value to the society. In the United States, it speaks to not just the climate change, but then also national security side, as well as energy security. Even though we're producing more oil and gas in recent years, in many ways, again, in the context of reduced carbon future, the fossil fuels will be increasingly looking its future reduced in power, and much more so in perhaps in industrial usage in petrochemical side. And so that's very much changing. I wanted to also mention that looking at more recent conversations in places like the United Kingdom, it's quite interesting how the 10 points that Prime Minister Johnson recently, unveiled includes nuclear. And I think in many ways, other than national security, energy security, and also climate security, if you will, I think many of these advanced industrialized countries are also starting to realize the linkage between innovation strength and national competitiveness, or innovation competitiveness and national competitiveness. And often for the countries that already do have nuclear energy science and technology complex establishment, it really is, maintaining nuclear has very much become part of that efforts. If many governments start to think that if you lose the nuclear innovation competitiveness to countries such as China, then overall the competitiveness in other parts of scientific endeavors, whether it's AI or telecommunication network and those things, may eventually suffer. So I think it's definitely becoming part of the bigger ecosystem as countries look to remain competitive in many different venues.
We're going to be staying on the same topic as we move on in a few minutes on nuclear energy and energy security and nuclear safety on our second panel. I see that the Vice Minister is already joined us. Before we move in to the next panel, I wanted to ask to see if any of the speakers or if the Ambassador or Mr. Vanutus have any comments or any questions from the first panel so far.
Mr. Geropoulos, I don't have a question, but please just make sure that our distinguished speakers will answer to some questions from the audience. You can see that on the chat.
Oh yeah. This earlier we had there was only just asking about the presentations, but now I see that there are some recent ones. Yeah.
I think there is also, I don't know if it was answered, the question from Mr. Ambassador, Dr. Rolandas Kaczynskas, to Ms. Nakano, and from Mr. George Polychroniou.
Yeah,
the question is.
Perhaps I can ask directly the question. We spoke, it's a question to Ms. Nakano. We spoke briefly about this already last week when we had a test, but I think it's a question interesting to the whole audience. And you mentioned during your presentation about the declining US leadership in the area of nuclear energy. So what shall we expect from the new US administration in terms of regaining this leadership? And where do you see the potential areas of cooperation between the US and the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think nuclear energy is one of the common denominators between the Democratic Party and Republican Party. Therefore, under the Biden administration, I expect nuclear energy to stay as an important agenda that has bipartisan congressional support, because Congress essentially, has to fund anything that the administration wishes to do. So, for example, on the research and development side, the Democratic members of Congress that want to see stronger nuclear role for climate reasons, they have been funding. The Republican members of Congress that want to have preserve nuclear energy for national security reasons, they have been supportive of funding nuclear energy research. Also on the export side as well, I believe that a Biden administration would continue to engage countries around the world. When it comes to, I think, the cooperation with our European friends and allies, I think it's going to be both public and private partnership. In other words, in the United States, there are roughly 60 companies that are developing things like small modular and advanced reactors. I think the interest in them working with European governments, but then also companies in Europe to realize the potential will remain strong. Again, it's very much private sector led in the United States. And it's only rather recently that the government has been much more proactive. But I think there's a greater recognition that nuclear is not an ordinary commodity. It really needs to have government partnership, not just because these non-proliferation safety things require government-to-government understanding and commitment, but then also because of the commercial risks that could be a little too large, but then also the value of nuclear as almost non-carbon emitting source of technology is hard to really, let the free market, put the price down, if you will. So I think there'll be in much more of a climate context. I think Biden administration will have quite an active discussion and more, quite open, rather than how most Americans traditionally associate nuclear energy and any Democratic Party administration in the past. I think that era is pretty much the history. Thank you.
I see one, I think last question about the Russia from the audience about Russia and its role in helping Turkey build the Akuyu plant. And they say that it's also increasing its influence in the Muslim world, and it's causing tensions in the West camp. How much, to which extent is Russia expected to follow the present policy of assisting Turkey without risking to lose a lot in the foreseeable future if the latter uses the nuclear technology in order to create a nuclear arsenal? I think, Mr. Zanidis mentioned that before, but this is a question for all speakers. If it's for all speakers, if anybody wants to jump in, if Ms. Nakano or Mr. Zanidis.
I would offer just one quick comment from my perspective, and I'm sure my two other colleagues have much sort of a deeper thought. But this, I mentioned that the current Akuyu project is on a build, own, operate model. It has been discussed quite a bit how sustainable that model is for Russia. Rosatom is taking a huge financial sort of burden associated with it. So in combination with the country risk, or the risk arising over many of the geopolitical tension, I think it could give potentially some sort of reconsideration of this deal as a whole. I'm not saying that is to abandon it, but then because it's not just the geopolitical, but it's in reality, it is quite an expensive endeavor. It's something that we originally, those of us that look at these geopolitics of nuclear energy policies it could be a new model that could be replicated. Thus far, it has not been replicated. And then that shows that Russia, as rather limited economic means, may or may not want to really, continue on in the same scale and pace that was initially advertised to be. So when I think about the Turkey question, I definitely consider it in a sort of a bigger context, including geopolitics, but also the financial burden side as well. Thank you.
that's a good transition to move into our second panel. We're going to be still focusing on nuclear energy and energy security and nuclear safety. But I think in this panel, also be focusing more on the case of Belarus as well. Our first speaker is the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Mr. Albinas Zanavicius. And Your Excellency, if you have, I would like to hear your comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I was not able to start listening to this excellent webinar from the very beginning, but definitely what I heard at the end of the first session was really interesting and very much coincided with the concerns that we have here in Lithuania. I mean, in our long history, we were situated at the crossroads of Europe, and we were always fighting for our identity, freedom, and independence. And even though we are members of NATO and European Union today, we are still fighting on a daily basis different hybrid wars, be it related to disinformation, be it related to foreign influence campaigns aimed at our domestic decision-making or attempts to rewrite history. It is a war with no bullets, guns, tanks, or soldiers, but we also observe that energy and investment in strategic sectors can be used by some countries as a tool to expand their spheres of influence and shift geopolitical dynamics. I think energy security is important for almost all countries. Lithuania is no exception. Even more so, we were extremely dependent on one supplier still very, very recently, and inherited infrastructure that actually isolated us from the rest of Europe. Since our membership in the European Union in 2004, we have taken bold steps to revert that trend, to implement game-changing projects, to diversify our energy supplies and routes, to integrate into the European Union's energy market, and to reduce political risks. We can really boast and share good practice in the field of energy security with our partners. We built power bridges with Sweden and Poland, and will complete the construction of gas interconnection with Poland next year. Our LNG terminal in the seaport Klaipėda is operational already for the 7th year. And LNG terminal was a game changer, which actually ensured diversity of supplies. Now we source natural gas from Europe, Africa, Middle East, and even United States. Before 2015, that was impossible. We had only one pipeline coming from Russia. Yet our quest for energy independence, which already took decades, is still far from the end. Today, we still face challenges in our electricity sector. Since closure of our only nuclear power plant in 2010, Lithuania imports more than 70% of electricity annually consumed in the country. Of course, we had discussion about an energy mix of the country. We still are not there yet. We don't have yet final decisions. Lithuania has developed ambitious goal to develop internal energy production from local renewable sources, such as onshore and offshore wind, solar. We also burn municipal waste, biomass, and syngas. And in our plans, 45% of our country's demand for electricity will be generated from renewable sources by 2030. In respect of energy independence and security, the period until 2025 will be especially important for Baltic states, since we aspire to desynchronize from the Russian electricity networks and to reconnect to Europe. And these next 4 to 5 years are final steps in the quest of our energy independence. In this view, however, we are fighting yet another battle, and that is a battle against a geopolitical project of Russia. It was mentioned already in the first session. It is a nuclear power plant that has just started its operation very close to our border in Belarus. The object is not just a threat to our energy security, because we have very peculiar situation when this powerful nuclear power plant is being built in the area which has no energy deficit. So that means Belarusian nuclear power plant is built for exports to European Union market. And at the same time, we have very serious doubts about safety culture in that nuclear installation. We have had European Union stress test team in the nuclear power plant. They found major safety deficiencies, and these deficiencies were not addressed, and power plant just started operation. Well, traditionally, when you see the geopolitical aspects, politicians normally tend to consider pipeline politics, meaning oil and gas transportation through pipelines. But in the nuclear field, we can also see that very real geopolitical factors are being used there. Recent global tendencies in nuclear energy industry are showing that state-owned companies coming from two countries, namely Russia and China, seek to expand their nuclear presence, including internationally, by exporting reactors to those countries that are within their geopolitical orbits. It is estimated now that nearly 2/3 of new reactors under construction worldwide are using either Russian or Chinese designs. And here we have a very big question: how much the state support played here to achieve this result? We have no doubts that nuclear power plant projects by Russian state nuclear energy company Rosatom are a part of Russia's foreign policy, and any deal for nuclear power plant construction has objectives aside from economic ones. The company not only builds and operates the power plant, but also provides the necessary funding at the cost of prolonged dependence. Additionally, newcomers to nuclear energy like Belarus, Turkey, Egypt have neither robust safety framework nor full capacity to withstand pressure of technology providers. And of course, if we had, for example, a nuclear regulator in Belarus at the same level as in Finland, probably our night sleep would have been a bit better. But we also see that Belarusian nuclear regulator is not capable to withstand pressure from Rosatom. So as a result of this situation, the European Union in the future might be surrounded by new nuclear power plants implemented in a questionable, low construction safety manner. And Ostrovets nuclear power plant, in our view, is one of them. But we also have examples in Turkey and also in Egypt. Belarusian nuclear power plant in Ostrovets is the most pressing example today because it is already operational. As of 3rd of November, Belarusian regime connected to the grid this unsafe installation, ignoring EU calls to address nuclear safety issues without delays. It is quite symbolical that the incident occurred already next day after official launch of nuclear power plants, and that, in our view, further confirms low safety culture and lack of independent oversight in this project. And when European Union is facing challenges from outside, no matter from south or east, the European Union, we believe, should speak in one voice. EU policy instruments should be developed, strengthened, and applied to all European neighborhood countries in order to ensure compliance with the highest international safety standards. Lithuania would favor the EU's comprehensive policy on nuclear safety in the EU neighborhood. The European Union should be ready to mitigate possible nuclear risks from beyond the physical EU borders. And here, I will finish with that. We see a lot of room for cooperation with our Greek and Cypriot colleagues. So that is my introductory statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions afterwards. Following your interesting presentation and about Lithuania and its energy mix, and also the geopolitical influence of the Belarusian plant built by Russia in your backyard. Our next speaker is Mr. Kostis Stambolis. He's the president of the Institute of Energy for Southeast Europe. Mr. Stambolis, if you want to go ahead with your presentation, and I'm sure you can give us a view of the of nuclear energy in Southeast Europe.
All right. So first of all, I wish to thank you the initiative taken by the Embassy of Lithuania, and especially His Excellency Mr. Rolandas Kačinauskas, and of course my friend Andreas Banučius from Kedisa. Thank you very much for this very timely initiative. I was very, very relieved to hear the comments by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zananavicius, about Lithuania's quest for energy independence. And I say relieved because in the present milieu in European Union and globally, the words energy independence is being systematically derided. Many governments and many think tanks believe that energy independence is something passé, is something that we should not be talking about, especially in European Union, where everybody should depend on everybody else, and all our systems, electricity, gas, are interconnected. So the fact that Lithuania is taking this stand is providing a lot of comfort, I would say, and it is certainly showing the road ahead, in the sense that it shows how within a much broader energy system, like the one in the European Union, there is ground for government, state initiatives which aspire to provide the citizens with security in terms of energy. And this is not well understood. And therefore, your comments, Mr. Minister, have been very, very important and very timely. So I will not waste any more of your time and move directly to my presentation, which has to do with decarbonization in Southeast Europe and the role of nuclear power. Our institute has been working over the last 15 plus years on all aspects of energy in Southeast Europe. And when we say Southeast Europe, as you'll see in the map, we include West Balkans, the east part, which is Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and of course Turkey. And lately we have included Israel in our list of countries which we systematically follow in terms of statistics and information analysis. So why Southeast Europe is so important? We think it has great strategic interest for the rest of the Europe. This is definitely one of the reasons. At the same time, it has an economic interest because this part of Europe is still growing faster than other parts, because many of the countries back in the early 90s were far behind in terms of economics. They're still catching up. Incredible as this are, they're still catching up, because don't forget in 2008, 2009, we had a major economic crisis. This put the economies backwards, and now they're growing again. And now backwards again because of coronavirus. So anyway, our region has strategic importance and economic importance. Turkey is a case by itself. We definitely include Turkey in our parameters of study, but as far as integration with the rest of Southeast Europe is not taken. However, we always consider Turkey because Turkey plays an important role in terms of energy transfers, energy flows, and energy trade between Southeast Europe and Turkey. In our work, we have been focusing on analysis and information flow to our members. And as part of our analysis, we have embarked on major projects like the Southeast Europe Energy Outlook. The first publication was in 2011, a more complete one in 2016-17. And now we are working and hopefully will be completing very soon the 2020-2021, which is going to be published in April next year. This is a kind of energy atlas of the region. At the same time, we have been working with our colleagues in different countries in Southeast Europe through the Southeast Europe Energy Dialogue, which started in 2007 in Thessaloniki, and we continue. The next one is in 2 weeks' time, in December 9th and 10th, and everybody is invited to attend and participate. So with Southeast Europe Energy Outlook and the dialogue, we are constantly moving around Southeast Europe, connecting people and institutions working on energy. Let us have a look on the actual figures in our area. So we see in terms of gross inland consumption, what's happening in 2008 and 2018. We have the solid fuels, which play very, very prominently. And in fact, their share has diminished somewhat between 2008 and 2018. At the same time, we have natural gas, which has almost the same input. And we have nuclear, which you see the 5% in 2008 has gone smaller to 4% in 2018. And of course, renewables, which has increased over the last 10 years. So this is the gross inland consumption that we're talking about, the total energy consumed in the 15 countries of the region, including Turkey. Now, if we go to the power generation mix, we see here that nuclear, the share of nuclear is much higher, especially if we take Turkey out, the share goes to about 16%. With Turkey, it is 8%. But if we take Turkey out from the electricity generation, the share rises to 16%. So nuclear is very important for power generation in Southeast Europe, even at its present state, and I will explain that later. If we take a look on the overall energy issues in our area, we'll see that there's a marked divergence between EU and Southeast new energy strategies. Electricity and gas interconnections. It has to do with coal, which plays a very important role for power generation in several countries in the region. Do with renewable energy growth, which is not that fast as in other parts of Europe. And it has to do with nuclear, which it remains a viable option, but I would say an option which is not much discussed about. And therefore, today's seminar, I think, is very important because it brings the importance of nuclear energy on the table. So what's happening as far as energy consumption and what is going to happen in the future? So we see from modeling that we carried out the situation, including Turkey. We see that just putting Turkey on the map, the energy demand over the next few years actually rises. If we take Turkey off the map, we see a rather flat landscape in terms of energy consumption. And this is understandable because the countries in the region will be moving towards a different energy model with energy efficiency playing an important part in this process, but also because of demographics. Turkey's population is growing much faster than any other country in the region. The population of the countries which you see here are more or less stable. So demographic, economic activity, energy efficiency do play an important role on how we forecast energy demand in the future. And when we come to energy policy, the current framework is focusing on 2020 or 2030 and the long-term goal. And as you all know, we have now new revised targets which have yet to be approved, but nevertheless, the dynamics are for much higher energy, much higher reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And what it means for other parts of energy is, for other forms of energy, is that really we're talking a lot more renewables, a lot more energy efficiency, and containment of emissions in all forms. The energy policy framework, as I said, are going to be revised. I believe that not other people in the Institute may share this thought, but I believe that the EU is definitely self-flagellating itself by imposing such higher targets, because the gas emissions from Europe are going down over the last 10 years, on the one hand. Then they are about 8.5 to 9% in terms of global emissions. So it should be other countries, another block of countries, which should be putting more effort into lowering gas emissions. We already have targets. They are ambitious enough. Now we're going to make it even harder, higher. And this, I think, will reflect badly on economic development. So the higher the targets, the less money you're taking out of economic development. There is a lot of discussion going on now that by putting higher targets, we're somehow going to develop a totally green economy, and this is going to provide a much higher GDP. I don't think that that our analysis does not support this necessarily. Where does nuclear stand in all this? EC communication back in 2018 was saying that renewables together with nuclear energy will be the backbone of a carbon-free European power system. So it remains to be seen in the current revision of targets and revision of energy policy in Europe, whether the EC will stick to this approach. if they stick to this approach, that means that we are going to see a more favorable climate towards nuclear, with nuclear increasing from 100 gigawatts to 120 gigawatts over the next 10 years. But this remains to be seen. So where do we stand in terms of policy? As far as our region is concerned, compared to the rest of the European Union, we see what we call an inverted pyramid arrangement. Therefore, the priorities are slightly inverted when it comes in a region. And the whole effort over the next few years in our region will be how this inverted pyramid can be put in the right place. Energy policy framework, what does this stand for Southeast Europe? Obviously, a lot more work needs to be done towards decarbonization. Against this, in opposition to this approach, we have the continuing exploitation of abundant indigenous coal resources in the region, because most of the countries in the region have a lot adequate, abundant, and low-cost coal resources, and they are determined to use them to produce electricity still at relatively low cost, because in most of the countries, emission costs have not started figuring in the overall electricity price. But of course, this is not going to last forever, and sooner or later, they will start filling the cost of emissions in their electricity. So this is a temporary situation, but nevertheless, it's here. Overall, we predict that we're going to have a shortfall of power generation in our region, because until now, our region has been net electricity exporters. This is going to change in the next 10 years, unless we have some major installed capacity entering into the picture. What I was saying earlier, that the countries in the region appear very determined to use the last ton of coal. You see here what's happening. We have several new permits, and we have actually coal-fired plants under construction right now. As far as nuclear is concerned, we see here the picture. We're talking about approximately 5 gigawatts of installed capacity nuclear in Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Slovenia. It's the nuclear reactor shared between Croatia and Slovenia at Skopje. There is a base for nuclear power in the region, and the effort is how we can increase this. Romania is moving ahead. Hungary is moving ahead with a very existing and programs. Bulgaria has been trying to discuss the entry of a new power plant, nuclear. This is not certain, but they're definitely trying. So where are these located? As you'll see here, they're located in Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania. And of course, Turkey is going to come very soon in the picture with a major power complex, nuclear power complex, now currently under construction in Akuyu in South Turkey. This is the present situation as far as nuclear power generation in Southeast Europe is concerned. I will just go very quickly over these slides. The presentation will be available for everybody to see. What is the future? As I was saying, the countries in the region are making plans. But the biggest project so far is undertaken by Turkey, where you see a four large 1,020 megawatts units to be installed in Akuyu. And the Sinop project is currently pending because the Japanese have pulled out, but nevertheless it's there. and we think it's going to be revived very shortly, definitely before 2023. So the other countries are moving ahead, as you see here. Some have very definite expected commercial year of operation, like Romania, which is something like 1.5 gigawatts. The same with Hungary, and Bulgaria is in limbo right now. Currently, EA has embarked on a study to examine the role of nuclear power in the region. We are building on a previous study, which we did earlier this year, called the Integrated Electricity Markets in Greece and Southeast Europe, and the role of international electricity interconnection and the impact of industry, which was backed by a group of major Greek and international industries. The study included detailed modeling on the regional electricity system carried out in collaboration with E3 Modeling. E3 Modeling is the company that does most of the modeling for the EU, for EC, and on the basis of which EC is making various predictions. And within this framework, we examined in some detail nuclear power. And this is some of the results we came up, and we see that nuclear plays a very prominent role when it comes to power generation in the region, because it provides very useful base load. We have, as lignite is being moved out of the picture, we have gas coming in to take part of its load, and nuclear. But gas has substantial emissions, as we all know, and over the long term, it's going to be withdrawn. So what this leaves us is nuclear and renewables, hydro, nuclear, renewables. And we think this is a winning formula. Not many people are talking about this. And not many people are talking about this because they say that nuclear is not flexible. We disagree on that. And if we look at the experience of France, which has been operating nuclear power reactors over the last 60 years, we see that nuclear power plants can be flexible and can be integrated very easily in the daily operation of the market. Finally, Jan is going ahead in a comprehensive study, and we have a program to study how nuclear is going to blend in with other forms of energy in Southeast Europe. We believe that nuclear power has a very useful role to play in Southeast Europe energy management, and hence we have embarked on this major energy research project. We will look into capacity, we will look into integration in the rest of the system. We're not going to look into emissions, we're going to look into how nuclear is going to work hand in hand with hydro and the rest of renewables. And we will study the power stability requirements, the relative cost from higher RES and the use of nuclear power. And we aspire to broaden the discussion within Europe on the constructive role of nuclear power in energy transition and beyond. And with this, I conclude my presentation. Sorry, it was long and complicated, but it will be there available for everybody to have a look. And I thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Stamboulis, for this very interesting presentation about the energy mix in the Balkans and the rest of Southeast Europe. Definitely, as Europe is looking to reduce its CO2 emissions, nuclear could play a role in the energy mix. And on that, we'll take questions at the end. But on that note, we discussed a lot about nuclear safety issues before, and we mentioned the Belarusian nuclear power plant case. Now we're going to get a much more closer look with Mr. Kamil Klisinski. He's a specialist in Belarusian affairs at the Center for Eastern Studies. But he's based in Warsaw, Poland, and also he knows a lot also about other plants as well. But the focus would also be on the Ostrovets plant. Mr. Klisinski.
Thank you very much. Thank you for invitation to such interesting event. Last but not least, I would like to present more precise information about this quite controversial project, as the nuclear power plant in Astravets is. This power plant, first power plant in Belarusian history, appeared in a very difficult context, a difficult context of history of Belarus, a difficult context of social and environment circumstances, and also, of course, political factors. First of all, I would like to present very generally, of course, due to time limitation, difficult past of Belarus in context of nuclear energy. Because Belarus was one of the biggest, maybe even main victim of disaster in Chernobyl in Soviet Union, at the end of Soviet Union in the 80s, and contamination, especially in southern part of Belarus, still is there. And still Belarusian food, part of Belarusian food produced, especially in agriculture, in Belarus is contaminated by this disaster, by result of this disaster. This is very deeply also in social and national memory of Belarusians. And it was one of factors of collapse of, maybe not collapse, but decline of respect to Soviet authorities in Belarusian Soviet Republic at the end of the 80s. It is a disaster, and how it was solved, and how it was hidden from the citizens at that time, and also environmental context and a political context. We should also understand that Belarus is very highly dependent on Russia. It's not a typical ally. Of course, officially we can call that Russia and Belarus are allies. They are in alliance. But if you look at the map and compare Russia and Belarus with their potential in many cases, in many spheres, we should understand that there's not normal alliance between such different countries with such different power. And also the location of this investment. It was mentioned several times here, so maybe I don't want to go into details. A location is very controversial. It's not based on scientific reasons. This is a very dangerous place looking from a seismological point of view. Also, there is no enough evidence that it will be safe in case of any catastrophe, in case of any difficulties in functioning. This is also a very controversial location looking from a political point of view, only 50 kilometers to Vilnius, to capital of Lithuania, only 30 kilometers to Belarusian-Lithuanian border. So location of this NPP is also a source of many emotions, many conflicts, many controversies. Very important factor, if you would like to explain how it was done, it's choice of contractor. Choice of contractor initially, when Belarusian authorities, despite all those all this set heritage memories with Chernobyl, when they decided to have nuclear power plant, they announced open tender. It was very initial stage. It was in 2011, 2010. They announced open tender. Even in 2008, where was first information about that, and many companies were interested in building this new object in Central Eastern Europe, in Astravets. Also Westinghouse Toshiba, French Areva, and of course Rosatom Stroyexport, Russian company. But in the progress of this process of a preparation to tender, it turned out that there is only one contractor without any open, transparent procedure. It is, of course, Russian contractor. This decision was made out of any international standards of tenders, of procedures of choice. It was purely a political decision connected to all these complex of relations between Moscow and Minsk in context of dependency, which I mentioned, which is between Belarus and Russia, especially from Belarusian side. In my earlier presentations, I was saying that the schedule of building of this NPP is ambitious, but still realistic. Now we are after opening of first block of this nuclear power plant. It happened on the 7th of November, anniversary of October Revolution, which is still very important celebration in Belarus, in Belarusian memories policy, but this is of course a different subject. And after this opening, after this ceremony, I should change this point of my presentation that schedule was ambitious and not still, but realistic. Unfortunately, for this investment and safety in the region was realistic. Within several years, starting from 2012, when construction has started, Belarusian authorities achieved, of course, with Russian contractor Rosatomstroyexport, achieved this investment. It was quite fast pace of building this kind of object. Also looking from a point of view of preparation of Belarus, their organizational and technical culture, they weren't prepared enough to this investment. They used mostly Russian specialists, but of course many companies were local, were Belarusian, and the quality of their work is also under question mark. Of course, I don't want to decline everything what was done there. I also visited this object last year, in one year before, but not everything, softly speaking, was done at excellent level. Maybe some technical parameters of this investment: 2 nuclear units with a capacity of 1,000 of megawatts. It will be power. It will be capacity of this object. Project is based on new generation power plant technology, of course, Russian technology. If contractor is from Russia, it's obvious that technology is Russian. This is AES 2006, enriched uranium U-235. What is very interesting when we look at Belarusian energy security concept, energy security strategy till 2035, we can notice that there is a very artificially set indicator of consumption and indicator of production. They are on equal level. This is very old Soviet school of planning, when everything should go according to plan, but of course life and practice is a completely different dimension. But in this strategy is reflected on the plan, on the ambitious plan where consumption in the country is growing in very idealistic way, together, completely neck to neck, together with production. In this way, Belarusian authorities were hidden main problem, main challenge, which is connected with this nuclear power plant. This is surplus of energy, because nowadays, more than 90% of electricity in Belarus is produced from gas, from burning gas stations. Of course, gas comes from Russia. Russia is a monopolist as a supplier of gas for Belarus. So now when we look maybe in more realistic way into Belarusian structure and energy mix, which they have now, there is a very big problem how to switch smoothly, effectively switch the energy system from burning gas, from this gas production, to consumption of energy, which will come, maybe not this year, because this year everything is on initial stage, but next year and several years after, how to absorb additional energy from a nuclear power plant in Astrovets. This challenge, this gap, which appeared after launch of power plant in Astrovets, is a result of different orientation of this investment. As it was mentioned, maybe I suppose in one of the previous presentation, one of goals, even one main goal of this investment was export energy to external markets, especially to Baltic countries, to Lithuania, Latvia, maybe Estonia, to Poland as a neighboring country, to Ukraine, and probably to Russia. But Russia wasn't the first market, the first goal of this investment. As we also could learn from presentation of Mr. Minister, Lithuania is not interested, softly speaking, in import of this energy. Latvia is also closed nowadays for this direction. Estonia is too far and also is not there. Poland resigned as well from this energy. Ukraine theoretically could import Belarusian energy, which will come from nuclear power plant, but Ukraine so far is closed for import of energy due to internal factors, due to a protection of internal market of electricity. Russia theoretically also is open, but there is a very big problem of price for this energy, because we also should add that this nuclear power plant in Astrovets is not built for Belarusian funding. This is built almost in 100% for Russian loan, long-term loan for 15 years of repayment. This is the biggest loan in history of modern independent Belarus. This is loan for $10 billion. As Belarusian authorities are claiming, Belarusian side used so far $6 billion, but still it's very high amount. And starting from 2022, Belarusian authorities should start repayment of this loan, which will be a very big burden on Belarusian finances or on Belarusian budget. And of course, even now, Belarusian state experts, not even independent, which are critical to this investment, but even state experts, Belarusian state expert, governmental experts on energy field, they counted that price of this energy will be higher by 5 or 6 cents at each kilowatts for this energy than normal energy, which is produced, for example, from gas in Belarusian energy sector. It means that this energy will be much more expensive, or maybe not much more, but at least more expensive than Russian energy, which is produced in Russia. It's not very promising for their plans on export. So we are coming back to main challenge for Belarusian authorities, for Belarusian side, what to do with additional energy, what to do with surplus in terms of lack of perspective, space for export. Even in 2018, on April, Alexander Lukashenko, in his annual address to the nation, openly admitted that his ministers have not been able to present a convincing concept for the utilization of the plant and its integration with the Belarusian economy. Despite 2 years despite that this the statement was made by Lukashenko 2 years ago, it's still there. It's still this problem is still very difficult, and Russian authorities didn't find convincing a strategy what to do with this surplus. Of course, they announced some ideas, for example, incentives for buyers to increase energy consumption at night, where the biggest surplus occur. What is very interesting, but also very ambitious, they would like to develop infrastructure for electric buses and cars. In Belarus, also to find another space for consumption. They would like to complete electrification of residential buildings, including heating systems. They would like to create a reserve peak of capacity of 800 megawatts, including 400 megawatts to 2018. It was made 2 years ago, but still there is a problem with this modernization and changes in the energy mix and energy system. So this is this kind of problem, and as was mentioned, one day after launch of first block of nuclear power plant in Astraviec, appeared that equipment is not excellent. As far as I know, it wasn't a reactor; it was additional equipment, some compressors, thermostats. And they failed. Only one day they worked in a good way. They failed, and official statement from Rosatom was that everything is fine. This is very short-term break of our work. Equipment was acquired in Italy. So Italians are guilty, of course, according to the Russian constructor. But don't worry, we'll exchange this ineffective Italian equipment into Russian equipment, and now we have a message from Astraviec, from the Russian authorities, that everything was fixed, and the nuclear power plants will start again so far at 40% of its capacity. In next year, Belarusian authorities plan to open a second block of this nuclear power plant, what means that full power plant will start next year. This is and it will be still a challenge, not only from environmental and energy point of view, but also in political context of difficult relations between Belarus and Russia, and also between Belarus and Lithuania, to some extent also between Belarus and Poland. Maybe I will finish at this point. If you have some additional questions, of course, I'm ready to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klisinski, for this presentation of this controversial Belarus nuclear power plant, not only in terms of safety issues, but also, as both the Deputy Foreign Minister of Lithuania mentioned, and you as well, that looks like it's primarily for export, and it will be interesting to see who the market would be for this nuclear, and how it would change the whole balance in the region. For example, if you are based in Poland, right? And Poland has no nuclear energy. So is this a possibility to have, to have power from Belarus supplying Poland to help it with decarbonization to meet its energy needs?
This is a question to me. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, Belarusian authorities tried within many years to convince us that this electricity, this is what we need, this is not just what we need, and there was several attempts on a very different levels to convince Polish authorities, but we were quite skeptical towards this investment. We also think that nuclear power plant in Astraviec is not excellent investment, not excellent construction. Softly speaking, there is a lot of questions. we don't stay on such strict position that we deny Belarusian needs to have nuclear energy. Of course, this is independent country, and they can decide also about their energy mix independently. But the way how they did it, how they constructed, and first of all, lack of transparency of this investment, of relations between authorities and Russian contractor in whole context of Belarusian and Russian political relations, influenced our position. It became more skeptical. So decision was no, we are not interested, and even infrastructure, which was in very, very bad condition, which needed to be modernized. I mean, energy bridge between Poland and Belarus was dismantled 2 years ago, if I'm not wrong, or even 3 years ago. And now we even don't have effective working energy connection between Belarus and Poland. So far, Poland shouldn't be considered as a market for Belarusian energy from nuclear power plant.
Thank you, Mr. Klisinski. I have a question for the Deputy Foreign Minister of Lithuania. You mentioned earlier that I think 70% is imported electricity, and now with the decarbonization efforts, it looks like the energy needs are going to be increased. Is mainly the gas as a transition fuel the solution for the energy security of Lithuania at this stage, as it makes the movement to more other forms of energy?
Thank you for this question. Well, the situation in our region is quite specific because Lithuania is very well interconnected with other European countries. We have abundant supply of cheap electricity already coming mainly from Sweden. Price is extremely competitive, and to a certain extent that prevented our own creation of baseload generation because economically it is not viable to compete with imports. Of course, we understand that this situation when Lithuania imports 70% of electricity is not sustainable from the national security point of view, even though we are very well connected with the rest of Europe. Therefore, there are different plans how to increase our own baseload generation. Well, we have quite developed and abundant supply of natural gas, and that would naturally be seen as a probable transitional fuel, and we still have abundant generation capacity in gas installation. Therefore, we can use this one. We also consider installing some batteries. We have a hydro accumulation power plant in the middle of Lithuania of 900 megawatts, which again can be expanded. So there are different options on the table. Unfortunately, our population voted against nuclear power plant in the referendum. So it is highly unlikely that Lithuania would be building our own nuclear power plant. But with nuclear power plant, it would be also quite complicated because the general level of prices in the region is very low. So we get the wholesale price of electricity is extremely competitive. So we keep all options open. And I think that for our baseload generation, we will actually employ the mix of batteries. Probably will increase capacity of our hydro accumulation power plant, just taking very cheap night electricity, and gas generation will also be increased, especially taking into account the current prices in the gas market.
And you mentioned that the plant from the Belarusian plant is mostly going to be for export. Do you think this is going to create an imbalance in the market or an kind of glut of extra electricity coming in your region?
Well, in terms of electricity coming from Belarusian nuclear power plant, our parliament was quite clear. They voted unanimously prohibiting trade in electricity coming from that nuclear power plant. So this is not an option for us to rely on that energy supplies. But, we are operating in the common market of the European Union. So that electricity from nuclear power plant in Ostrovets might come from other European countries to Lithuanian market, and we have to develop mechanisms how to avoid that. Talking about destabilization of the market, of course, if we do not prevent this electricity entering our markets, then we have roughly 2 gigawatts of extra capacity at our border. And if we do not manage market properly, then even though the price of electricity, Belarusian electricity, would be quite high, the cost of production of that electricity would be quite high, we do not exclude that this surplus electricity could be sold below cost. And that in the long run would undermine our energy security. Therefore, I think we are planning to do whatever it takes to defend our market against electricity coming from Ostrovets nuclear power plant.
Mr. Stambolis, you mentioned in your presentation that for Southeast Europe, in order to have for the decarbonization efforts, that nuclear energy could play an important role. But given the fact that we have cases, obviously in Romania, in Bulgaria, in Hungary, the joint plant between Slovenia and Croatia, and then Turkey, which is now embracing nuclear energy. But what do you see is there potential for further expansion in the area, and how could that play in the energy mix? Especially with, given that a lot of those countries are relying on natural gas for their supply.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. We do not foresee any entirely new projects coming up in the market. I think nuclear generation expansion will take place from the countries already involved, which the ones you mentioned. At least with the present EU policy environment. If EU policy turns more positive towards nuclear, then we cannot exclude the case where other countries in the region will embark on new nuclear power plants, especially with modular, small-scale nuclear power plants coming into the market from 2025 onwards. And I refer here to the UK project to be run by Rolls-Royce, which foresees the construction of small-scale, we're talking about 200, 300, 400 megawatts most nuclear plants, which will bring the cost down and will also encompass new security parameters, improved security parameters. Therefore, it will make it even safer to use nuclear energy. So unless we see a switch on EU policy in favor of expanding nuclear power plants or nuclear power, we do not foresee that in a region at least, we're going to see new initiatives other than the ones developed by countries which already use nuclear power, that is Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, and of course, Turkey. Sorry.
Mr. Stambolis, you're speaking on the issue of Southeast Europe. There's a question from the audience saying that as you know, a lot of the panelists have mentioned about the potential danger of nuclear energy. What would be your thoughts on how to find a right balance between a need for nuclear energy and a need to eliminate dangers related with some nuclear power plants? Should the EU import nuclear energy from third countries if it's generated in nuclear power plant, which poses certain safety and security problems? I guess you mentioned the case of Turkey earlier, but this is a question from the audience.
Well, I think once a country embarks on the construction, once a country enters the nuclear cycle, there are several safeguards as far as security and is concerned. Don't forget that all nuclear power plants are being supervised by the UN Atomic Energy Authority in Vienna. And all plants have to abide by very strict rules. So I don't think that this security fear or dimension plays very seriously in any country's thought plans.
There's a question from the audience saying that given that nuclear energy, there's a consideration that it has unsafe potential in energy development, and in view of diversification of energy resources as an obligation in order to reduce CO2 emissions and also boost energy security, and this could affect the geopolitical interests. The question is, how could we make this value chain sustainable, safe, and perhaps more user-friendly, having specifics there of nuclear energy? And this is addressed to everybody. I don't know if anybody would tackle this.
Can I answer first?
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is not very much a valid reason in such type of arguments. And the reason is very simple. In any country, almost in any country you are now located in Europe, the citizens use electricity produced from nuclear energy. I mean, Lithuania told us very clearly that they import 70% of their electricity. In Greece, we import something like 30 to 40% of our electricity from other countries at times. And this electricity is partly used from nuclear. And unless, in our case, Romania and Bulgaria were producing electricity from nuclear, which is low cost, they would not have been able to export this electricity. So either the citizens who worry very much about nuclear, they should stop using electricity altogether, or they should study how the electricity mix is being made and then raise their questions as far as the electricity mix is concerned, rather than nuclear energy in particular.
Does anybody else want to answer this question? Or
if I may, but I would like to come a little bit back to the question of the nuclear safety. And I mean, when we talk about International Nuclear Energy Agency, it has two arms, and arm of non-proliferation functions quite well. Another one which deals with pure nuclear safety, well, our impression, taking into account example of Ostrovets nuclear power plant, is rather different, because that same agency simply refused to undertake certain studies related, for example, to the location of nuclear power plant, only because the site was already selected. So basically, we don't have, very clear opinion from that agency about whether the site was selected rightly or not. And then talking about imports of nuclear energy, well, we are 100% sure that we import also electricity produced in the nuclear power plants and nuclear power plants in Sweden. That is for sure. But we agree with the previous speaker that it is really important to see how these nuclear power plants are maintained. We are quite sure that nuclear power plants in Sweden are well maintained and do not pose a real nuclear threat. While, in the vicinity, Lithuania sees a very different example. And here we also have to consider what kind of instruments we can develop at the European level, because it is sure that when the constructor simply disregards safety features, that makes the construction of nuclear installation much cheaper. In turn, that installation produces cheaper electricity, and that in turn could harm, electricity producers that operate in the high safety environment. Therefore, I think our approach to imports of nuclear energy should be rather nuanced.
Okay, if I may add something about Astravets. This is very specific example. Generally speaking, of course, I'm not expert in nuclear energy. I'm expert in Belarus. I speak about this investment because it's located in Belarus. I'm not an engineer or scientist or in this area, but I think that this energy demands trust. Trust is very important. And once we have a nuclear power plant in Astravets in context of full lack of trust to investors, to Russian contractor, lack of trust to host of this project, the Belarusian authorities. We should also remember that this investment, the first block of this nuclear power plant was open 3 months after presidential election in Belarus. Very dramatic elections, very sad elections. When we have almost revolution in Belarus, but still very difficult internal situation, when you have full lack of dialogue between Belarus and the West. There is unprecedented collapse of dialogue between Minsk and Brussels, Minsk and Warsaw, Vilnius and Washington, and other capitals in Western countries. So in this vacuum of trust has started new power plant in Central Eastern Europe. This is very risky situation, and I wouldn't say that it stabilizes a geopolitical situation in our region.
Mr. Stambolis, there is, obviously Lithuania is very concerned because the plant is very close to its border, as well of all the other angles from concerning safety and also the situation in Belarus. But in the Southeast Europe, also the plants are, the countries are very close to each other, and I was wondering if the decision in one country to construct a nuclear power plant, how it is affecting its neighbors, and if the neighbors should have a say in a way, or given that there, or Europe in general could take all its countries in consideration when a plant is built by another country which is a member of the European Union, or a neighbor, like in case of Turkey, or what we see now with Belarus and Lithuania.
Well, Greece in the past has looked into Bulgaria and into Romania as far as the safety of the nuclear plants operating there. So many years ago, we had committees who examined these power plants, and at the end, there was approval backed by EU program on this in this respect. This is not, as far as West Balkans and Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary were not very much concerned, because any expansion of nuclear capacity takes place in existing sites. So these countries are not looking elsewhere, another site to build a nuclear plant. And in this respect, I share the views of the deputy minister about site location. Yes, if we start the examination from site location, it should be very much high on the list. And of course, I think once a country makes the decision, then the atomic energy is not, I don't think has the authority very much to avert this and go back. So this is an issue. I understand that. Now, as far as Turkey is concerned, Turkey has embarked on a very ambitious nuclear program. We're talking about 12 gigawatts in the next decade, the 4 or 5 gigawatts of which will come on stream in 2023, 2025. The issue is not so much on location, but the issue is whether Turkey is actually harboring any nuclear ambitions in terms of weapons. This is our main concern. So it's not a concern whether the area is going to be infected by radioactivity. This is a permanent concern for everybody. But the concern, as far as Turkey is concerned, not only for Greece but for other countries, is whether Turkey, by promoting such an ambitious and large-scale nuclear program, is harboring at the same time some plans for nuclear weapons.
We mentioned Russia, but in terms of China, China has also very, it was discussed in the first panel, but China has also very ambitious nuclear plans. How do you view the expansion of nuclear technology into Europe? We can start with Mr. Stanidis and then go to the Deputy Minister.
Is this question addressed to me, Kostas?
Yeah, it's to you.
Yeah. Well, China has the nuclear program of China is old and is building on this, is providing new technology. China sees the nuclear as in the heart of its program, long-term program for lowering emissions. I mean, China is supporting the concept of cooperation between nuclear and renewables, and they're doing this very openly. Now, the question is whether Chinese nuclear technology is going to be transferred somehow to Europe. The answer is no, because in the UK, where they are investing in nuclear power, they're doing so using French technology, and they tried to enter the Cernavodă plant in Romania. They had about 8 years of negotiations, and at the end, this ended nowhere, and they have pulled out from the Cernavodă plant altogether. So China's openings towards Europe to trying to export nuclear technology have come to nothing, I think.
I have a question for the Minister, Lithuania. You mentioned that your objections to the plant in Belarus, but on a EU level, what do you think Europe can do in terms of, is it like to make this plant more safe, or stop it altogether, or what can the EU do? Can it be done on an EU level, and what role can Lithuania play in this in Brussels?
Well, the situation is twofold. I mean, we have one example of unsafe nuclear power plant, which is, well, practically already built, and one unit of it will be operational very, very soon. We also have several projects in the pipeline, and first of all, I think that Europe should have a very clear position on how we see those nuclear installations in our vicinity, where by definition, to a certain extent, we will need to finance somehow the improvement of safety in those nuclear power plants or face otherwise consequences. So the question is, first of all, we need to be very vocal and very clear that all nuclear installations should be built properly, and that should start from the selection of sites where nuclear installation is being built. Another point is economic. Well, while decarbonizing our economy, we speak about certain measures against third country producers. One of those measures is carbon border adjustment mechanism. That, of course, relates to the pollution of CO2 in the atmospherics. And if countries do not comply with the Paris Agreement, then the European Union would probably be introducing some kind of tax. We also draw parallel with the nuclear installations here. Of course, they do not emit CO2, and that supposedly is their advantage. But at the same time, if the plant is built on the wrong side, ignoring basic nuclear safety standards, that gives unfair competitive advantage. And we also have to think what to do with those installations. We also need to think what to do with other installations like chemical plants that do not comply with the highest environmental standards. So this is our ideas for discussion. But we also see that despite very clear risks of nuclear safety, we also have economic questions here. We have questions of competitiveness here. And therefore, it is quite legitimate that our producers in the European Union that comply with the highest environmental and safety standards, they expect from the government to do something when there is an unfair competitor close to our border. So I think this is a question, a discussion of the future. But if we want to keep, production in the European Union, having all those very high environmental standards, we also have to think how to ensure level playing fields vis-a-vis third countries.
And now, Minister, with the you mentioned interconnectors. Between the Baltic countries and the rest of the European Union. Now, do you think that the potential of another a crisis of energy supply, now Europe has kind of eliminated this kind of risk anymore, and now it's more of other issues, in terms of reducing CO2 emissions or, the questions of safety. But in terms of Europe and the Baltic states meeting their energy needs, do you think they are now actually out of the woods now in terms of another possibility of a supply crisis in the future?
Well, I think that we are already well interconnected with other European countries, countries of the European Union, and here I mean the whole Baltic region, because Lithuania has interconnectors to Sweden and Poland. We will be building another interconnector from Poland under the sea. But Estonia is connected to Finland. So I guess major disruptions in our market are quite unlikely. Of course, our electricity grid operators are still working on improving safety of operation of our electricity grid, and that is in connection with our plans to synchronize our operation with the Western European electricity grid. So no, I don't expect that we can face serious blackout or any event of this magnitude. But we still need to work, at least in Lithuania, not to be that much deficit area. Although we have very good interconnectors, it is for a very good reason that countries generate most of their electricity themselves. And I think this is the way how Lithuania should build its energy policy.
As we're wrapping things up, Mr. Panagiotis Faelos, the head of research from Kedisa, has a question.
Open your microphone, Panagiotis.
You need to open your microphone. You're muted.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for the very interesting seminar on nuclear energy. What I'd like to ask, especially Mr. Stambolis, is how the nuclear energy that is developed by Turkey will affect the balance of powers in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm talking about the possibility that Turkey might become more aggressive using the power of the nuclear power. I don't talk about an accident that might happen in the nuclear energy, in the nuclear power of Turkey. I mean about how it can, Erdogan can use this power to change some things in the area.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. Very appropriate. You see, Turkey is dependent 70% for its energy. It imports 70% of all forms of energy, including electricity. So the overall plan is to strengthen the energy infrastructure of Turkey, and if possible, in the case of electricity, make Turkey as a net electricity exporter to the region. Turkey has already electricity connections with Bulgaria, with Greece, with Georgia, and with Azerbaijan, with Syria, and with Iraq, with all the countries in the region, and with Armenia. So the gamble here is for, if they manage actually to increase their installed capacity, especially from nuclear, backed by coal, gas, and renewables, then Turkey could become a net exporter, or at least take advantage of the appropriate price regime and make exports to other countries. So this is, on the one hand, this strengthens very much the energy situation of Turkey. But the fact that they are developing, they have entered the nuclear cycle and they are developing this huge program means that they are upgrading their whole energy basis. And I think this is the most important thing to consider, because if you have an advanced nuclear program, this has reverberations to the rest of the energy production. And of course, it reflects on strategy. The more emboldened Turkey becomes in energy, the higher the capacity to dictate decisions, even at energy level, in the neighboring countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stambolis.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you.
I think we're coming close to the end. I don't know if I see still, I'm happy to see that a lot of our panelists from the first panel are still around. And I was wondering if, if any of you have any questions or before we wrap things up.
I think Mr. Geropoulos, Mrs. Jane Akano made an interesting comment. I don't know if you may read it from the chat.
Yeah. Or I see
another attendee has another question.
Mr. Analyses, you want me to read it for you, or you can unmute your microphone and talk to us?
And I just wanted to make a comment that just last week, the European Utility European Utility Requirements, which is an organization, it's the Association of European Utilities, certified China's Hualong 1 reactor. That's their flagship reactor that China wants to globally export. The organization certified it to be in compliance with the European safety and operational standards. It's different from a construction permit or design approval. Each individual European country will still have to do, evaluate eventually if they do choose to, go with the Chinese reactor. But I just wanted to know that it's another step closer. It's another step in China's effort to export the reactor. And it's, for example, in the UK case, I think, Mr. or Dr. Stambulis is absolutely right that currently Chinese are still using the French or investing in the projects that use, the EPR reactor, the French designed. But the ambition is to use the investment leverage eventually to be able to site Chinese design reactor on a European soil. Again, it could come with a geopolitical string or not, but that's, we're already at the end of a seminar, but there have been concrete steps that are being laid by the China. So I think their debut in Europe may be closer than we might think.
Oh, that's very interesting. And also, I mean, as Mr. Stambulis mentioned, and you mentioned, since some of them come from Chinese loans, that means also, or investments, that means that it gives China a geopolitical edge in Europe as well, in terms of nuclear energy, since they will be investing in existing plants in Europe.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
You see, China has been very careful right from the start not to insist of using its own technology. China was more involved in European energy in the nuclear part, more as a commercial venture. And of course, participating in a commercial venture, they have equal rights. They can influence decisions, but they can also learn. So I think China's involvement so far in Europe has been welcome in the sense that they are a passive player with all the benefits for both sides. Now, sooner or later, China will, of course, develop an export-oriented nuclear reactor, which will be the culmination of the efforts of many decades, but working together with the French and USA and Russian in the past technologies. So Chinese scientists and engineers have actually picked up the best practice. And I think it would be very interesting to see what they will come up, at the end. I have not the slightest doubt that in about 10 years' time, China will be able to produce a very effective, highly secure, and very cost-competitive nuclear reactor. And of course, this will have to compete with other reactors which are being developed in the UK and in other countries.
May I just add a quick comment? China is already invested or involved in the grid system, the power grid system in countries like Portugal and Spain, and if I'm not mistaken, France as well in part. So it's already, familiar with the energy and electricity business. And I think I agree that it's been quite, it's much more about business. The only concern I have is that the way as, China perceives its external environment changing, for example, the way that, US-China tension has escalated in the recent years, depending on how China also perceives, but then also how others perceive China's challenge or threat, depending on how you term it, I think nuclear could turn into a tool for geopolitical leverage. Recently, there was a report of the speech that Chinese President Xi Jinping gave to Communist Party meeting in April, where he expressed interest in China creating, making a lot of technology commodities for example, in power sector to increase other countries' dependence on China. Now, it's not a bad thing in its own way. Interdependence could generate or reduce tension in international politics. But it's interesting how there has been articulation of potentially these exports to be ways to create dependence on China. And I think in the same speech, President Xi Jinping also mentioned how it could be used to deter, but then also retaliate potential supply or the supply chain cut by countries. I think he probably had the United States in mind. But so I'm just saying that, so far it's been much more about business. But in the future, I think we need to pay very close attention as to how this conversation may evolve into more of a contentious direction. Thank you.
Great, Mr. Nakano. Thank you very much.
Mr. Geropoulos, I have a quick question to Mr. Klesinski, if I still may.
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Klesinski, since you're an expert on Belarusian affairs and taking into account what's happening in Belarus now for more than 100 days, should there be change in Belarus? Let's imagine this. Do you think the new government might be more receptive to the concerns of neighboring countries? And also, what kind of incentives we as the European Union might have for Belarus to reconsider their position with respect to the nuclear power plant? Thanks.
Very, very interesting question. But first of all, of course, it should appeal new government. So far, is very well known Alexander Lukashenko, who keeps power and defends himself. I wouldn't say that in excellent way, but quite effectively. There is one trigger, one factor which could change this status. The state of play in Belarus is Russia, of course. Russia exerts enormous pressure. A big part of this pressure is intransparent. Is not visible, but we can read in between lines that Russia expects from Lukashenko to prepare and to launch constitutional reform, and after that, which is completely not in public, but we also understand from many contexts that Russia expects elections, maybe even next year's, and of course elections without Lukashenko. In this case, we should be also prepared for a new government, for a new president of Belarus, which will be probably pro-Russian, because could be promoted in this new electoral campaign by Russia. Why I'm talking so much about this issue, which is not main topic, of course, of our webinar, because this is part of answer for your question, Mr. Ambassador, because new president, which will be also I would say even more pro-Russian, could be more pro-Russian than Lukashenko is, because Lukashenko is not purely pro-Russian. He is pro-Lukashenko. Lukashenko stands for Lukashenko, not for Russia. So this new president will be interesting partner for this kind of negotiations, because he should also establish new contacts, new cooperation with European Union, with Lithuania as well. And if European Union will expose as one of main conditions to relaunch, to reopen new relations between Brussels and Minsk, and some changes regarding Astraviets, I mean more transparency, cooperation, maybe some new analysis, international analysis, assessments of safety of this NPP. Maybe it will work, because new president also, even more than Lukashenko, will need new reopening with the West, with European Union.
Great. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure moderating this panel, both panels, and I learned a lot of things today, and it was interesting discussion. As a journalist, I think it gave me a lot of story ideas for the future. You know, I can go after you one by one and ask you for a quote. I don't know if anybody else has to make a comment, or otherwise we'll wrap things up, and everybody can watch. The webinar was recorded, and I see that the speakers have shared their presentations, so I think there's a lot of material there for everybody if they want to revisit the discussion.
I would like just to thank everybody on behalf of Kedisa, especially His Excellency the Ambassador of the Republic of Lithuania and Greece, for his cooperation, his proposal, and the co-organization of today's event. Of course, you, Mr. Geropoulos, for the moderation of today's discussion, and our distinguished speakers with their excellent presentations and insightful comments and answers to our questions. And of course, all of the attendees who were more than 100 attended today's webinar. I don't know if Mr. Ambassador would like to say something. Thank you everybody for participating today in the webinar.
Thank you.
Just very briefly, I would like to join Dr. Bonutsas and Kedisa in organizing this. Actually, we have had much more than 100. We had
much more.
And because there was quite a big attendance of viewers on Facebook and YouTube, and it's been recorded. I certainly learn a lot. Nuclear energy is here to stay, obviously. So should our interests in nuclear energy, and to make sure that our interests are not overlooked and not jeopardized. So certainly it will remain a focal point for Lithuania. By the way, as we've been conducting this webinar, Lithuania has a new prime minister just elected by the parliament following the general election that we had a month ago. So nevertheless, this issue will remain as a very important part of the national agenda of Lithuania. I mean, the safety of nuclear energy and all the kind of issues related to this. So it was the first attempt that we organized this webinar here in Athens, in Greece, but certainly we'll continue to raise this issue. Lots of aspects to discuss, and I really very enjoyed the presentations and contributions by our distinguished panelists. And thank you to everybody, and also for all the audience which tune in for this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Goodbye. Have a nice afternoon.
You too.